Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It is Thursday. We're 2 days away from Notre Dame playing BYU, and we are going to have a big show today. We're going to talk a lot about Notre Dame's keys to victory in all phases of the game. But before we begin, obviously there's some breaking news in Notre Dame land, and we're going to discuss that at first as well. And then also, I want to prepare all of you for something that's going to be coming down the road here very soon. On Saturday, the weekend of the Stanford game, the day of the Stanford game, we are going to have a special show on that day. And we're going to tease a lot more about it on that day. We will let you all know the time of the show. It will be an on-campus show. We want fans to be there. We are going to have a very special announcement that day. It's going to be a lot of fun. And we're going to want you all there with us to celebrate at that time. So we'll have more details as we get closer to the game and get more things figured out for that game, Ryan. So I can't wait for that day. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yes.
But I want to dive into first, Ryan. Let's talk about the Jacob Lacy news. Now we're gonna be real careful with what we discuss here because we're still gathering information from all sides. I'm a big believer in getting data and intel from all sides, and so we're going to basically tell you what we know now that basically I have been able to confirm from multiple parties. The rest of it we'll have on the message board later today. So the rest of the stuff that I've been told, because it's a little bit more sensitive, is going to be stuff that we'll put on the message board later on. So yet another reason to sign up for boards.irishbreakdown.com. That's not a trick to try to get you to sign up. It's just right now we're still gathering information, and that's why we're not going to be as forthcoming with some of the stuff now, because I don't want to put something out that I heard from one source when I haven't heard it from the other three that I've spoken to. And I want to make sure that what we do put out is well sourced. And so then we can say, hey, this is what one side is saying, this is what the other side is saying. And so we can be fair with how we get this information out and get it to you. So we will share with you, obviously, just a little bit of what we know and then kind of what this means for Notre Dame. So number one, and again, I'm not trying to be a tease. Well, I guess that might be about the thing that's happening with the thing next weekend. So yes, I am being a tease about that one. Yes, but the Jacob Lacy thing, it's not really that. So let me tell you a couple things here going on. So number one, obviously Jacob Lacy announced that he is leaving the team and entering the portal. Obviously the timing of it is about the fact that he's played 4 games. So moral of the story, and this is something that I've been able to confirm from multiple people, is that Jacob basically was not happy with his playing time this year. It had been inconsistent. He played a lot against Ohio State, played a lot against Cal, played great against Cal, didn't play a whole lot against North Carolina, and didn't play a whole lot against you had 2 different streams going, Ryan. That's why we had to get that figured out. But he didn't play a lot against North Carolina. Only played 9 snaps a week after dominating against Cal. Didn't play a lot against Marshall. I think there was some frustration there and wasn't being kind of promised that he was going to play more moving forward, and he wanted to redshirt, and the redshirt would allow Jacob to have 2 years of eligibility remaining. Now, Jacob has played 4 years in Notre Dame. This is his 4th year. However, the COVID year of 2020 doesn't count, which means if he takes a redshirt this year, he would then have 2 years of eligibility remaining. And he wanted to use that in Notre Dame, but I think there were some things that had to go along with that just weren't going to work out. I don't want to get into too much because, again, I'm still trying to get from more sources. And when basically people weren't seeing eye to eye on certain things, and Jacob made the decision to leave. This is why I hate the transfer portal. I had somebody on Twitter saying, I can't blame him. He's doing what's best for him. I'm so sick of that. Look, maybe this is something that he needed to do. I'll find out more later, but I just think that this is just the fact that a kid can just leave in the middle of the season is something that just doesn't sit well with me, even if there's some legitimate reasons for him wanting to leave. If not, whatever. I don't like it, but it is the world we live in. At the end of the day, I think Jacob made a decision that he felt was best for him. I'm not passing judgment on that per se because I'm still trying to get more information. There are circumstances that I could find out, and I don't know what they are. I'm not saying I know them about this situation, Ryan. I'm just speaking in general. Mm-hmm. There are things that a kid or a parent or a coach could tell me that I would say, you know what? I understand why the kid left. He needed to leave. And there are other instances where I'm like, no, I'm not okay with that. I don't know enough about this situation yet. I've only got, I've gotten some intel on this, but I just want to hear a little bit more before I'm ready to kind of pass judgment on either criticizing the staff or criticizing Jacob or criticizing both, which is an option too. So I'm not there yet, Ryan. We're not there yet because we need to learn more about this situation. But what we do know is that he is leaving the team. And I was told that the players and coaches tried to talk him into staying, but they just weren't willing to kind of do the things that needed to get done to get him to stay, from what I understand. And he is going to enter the portal and have 2 years of eligibility left. And that's kind of where we are at with the Jacob Lacy situation. So he will not be with the team. That obviously is a major blow, Ryan, because, yes, his playing time had been inconsistent this year, which I don't quite understand. I would like to see them do part of it was the fact that they were using Riley Mills inside a lot last week against North Carolina, which I understand as well. But this is a blow because the interior of the line has been really good. They are in a position where they can sustain this loss now, but they now can't sustain an injury. They can't afford for anybody to get banged up now because then you start having to moving Riley permanently inside, which isn't ideal. You have to – there's a lot of other things you might have to do in order to be okay there if there's another injury. So it's a loss. It is a loss. Yeah. But I do think that as long as there are no other losses, which we'll see if that's going to happen or not, they can sustain this loss. They can. But the margin for error just got a lot thinner for a unit that has honestly, in my opinion, on the defense, you could argue either corner – coming into the Carolina game, it was corner and interior D-line were the two best units on defense. Would you agree with that, Ryan?
Yes.
Coming out of that game, it's now the interior because the corners gave up some boneheaded plays in that game as a whole. So I think through 4 games, I think the interior of the defensive line has been Notre Dame's best unit so far. And you just lost a player who's, has been a pretty good player so far for them when he's feeling healthy.
And I've been a big fan of Jacob Lacy too, Brian. I think in one of our preview shows for the season, I talked about him being like one of the key contributors, right? Like one of the X factors, I guess, for the defense. A guy that I thought had some penetration ability, and I think that we saw that in the Cal game, where you saw this kind of upside that he has as that penetrator when he's able to be healthy and be on the football field. So, never going to sugarcoat it and say that this isn't a loss. It's a loss to the depth you have because hey. You have Howard Cross, you have Jason Amalolo, very good football players. Chris Smith has played a lot better than we anticipated at a higher level or more impactful football player, I guess is the best way to state it.
We thought he'd just give good, solid backup snaps, and he's been good.
Yeah, he's been good. Yeah. And Gabriel Rubio started to show some signs of giving some legitimate snaps as a contributor. So at that point, you're just like, oh, man, this is a really deep and just good unit overall. So it takes a hit on that, but like you said, I do think that they have the depth and they have the players where you can subside this, right? Like it's not going to be something where like you lost Jacob and your interior defensive line goes from good to below average, right? Like it's still going to be a good unit. It's just obviously losing a nice contributor is a loss. There's no doubt about it.
I think that you look at this situation, Ryan, and it's a bit of a black eye for Notre Dame. Whether it's a legitimate situation or not, whether they're okay with it or not. I mean, it hurts to lose a kid, but this is just the reality of college football that we're in. And kids now have leverage where they can say, hey, look, if you don't give me A, B, C, and D, then I'm leaving. And that's the leverage they have now. And unfortunately, I would not change the 4-game rule. I would not. That's one thing that I'm okay with. I think maybe what I might do is I might say limit it to younger players, you know what I mean? Like if you play 4 games in your first 2 years, but if it's something that happens in your junior, senior year, it has to be injury related for you to grant that extra season, that kind of thing. So, but I think the 4-game rule is something I like and support. And sometimes there's just consequences to a good rule. What I don't like is when there's consequences to a bad rule that you knew those consequences are going to be there. This is just something that's going to be part of the deal. unfortunately. And it doesn't happen a ton, but it's part of it. So that's kind of how I feel about the situation. But it's a blow. It's a blow for Notre Dame. Now, is it one they can overcome? Yeah, they can. They can. I don't know if there's necessarily any. Maybe Jason Onye gets a chance to get some more playing time now. He gets moved up the depth chart and starts practicing with the twos a little bit. Maybe Tyson Ford starts getting a little bit more playing time. Maybe he's a guy that could be ready to kind of push for some of those snaps. So it's going to be interesting to see how they handle this, Ryan, and especially if there's another injury. If there's another injury inside, that could be that's when this could become problematic for Notre Dame.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that he cushions the loss too with the fact of because I agree with you, Brian. I don't want to see Riley Mills as a full-time interior player.
Right.
But the fact that he can do those things does help, obviously losing of a Jacob Lacy. Because what did he play last game? We said, what was it, 9 snaps you said he played last game?
Against North Carolina, yeah.
Yeah. So, again, it's a loss because he's a good football player. But with the depth that you've created with the Chris Smiths of the world, with Gabriel Rubio getting better, and having a guy like Riley Mills, who although we both like more as an outside-in type of player, the fact that he has done things inside in the past, you can supplement some of those snaps. So it's not a demoralizing loss, but it is still a loss. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. So that's kind of where we're at right now with the Jacob Lacy situation. I think what's the immediate impact? Obviously, Gabriel Rubio is going to get some more snaps. I think at nose guard, his nose guard snaps are the nose guard's not impacted, but as long as everybody's healthy. Yep. Now, what happens is let's say something happens to Howard Cross. Hypothetically, let's say Howard Cross can't play on Saturday, right? Then all of a sudden you're saying, okay, now who plays nose? Are you going to put Jason Adamiola at nose for some snaps? Are you going to put Riley at nose for some snaps? Does Chris Smith and Gabriel Rubio go from playing 7 to 10 snaps a game to 20, 30 each? Right, which would kind of be where they would have to be at that point in time. That's where we say you can't really sustain another injury. If as long as the nose guards are healthy, Cross, Rubio, Smith, then I think they're fine. Because you've got Jason Adamiola, you can play Riley Mills inside. You can move Alexander Ahrensberger inside the 3 technique as well against certain teams. A team that's going to come out and run the football on you all day. That's not really where you want to have Alexander Ahrensberger. If they're playing a USC. If they're playing, I wouldn't want Alexander Ahrensberger playing a bunch of snaps at 3 technique against Syracuse.
Right.
That's not where I want him, because that's a team that's they're going to run it at you. They're going to have a big physical offensive line and run it at you. Right, Ryan? I think we agree on that. But if he would have been playing some of that a little bit against USC, North Carolina at times.
Right. Yeah.
Against, BYU would be a game where, especially in some nickel packages, I'd be okay putting him inside, taking some of those snaps. But, in situations where that they're in a throwing situation, maybe if there's certain personnel groupings that BYU is more pass oriented in, you kind of match personnel like they have been the last couple of games. There's a body. Jason Onye is a kid, like I said, I wouldn't mind seeing kind of pushed a little bit. Jason's still probably a year away from being a major contributor. I really like his potential at Notre Dame. I don't know if this year's the year for him to be ready for that, but now he gets a shot, right? Potentially to get some more reps in practice, and then maybe that leads to some reps in games. So that's going to be the interesting thing. Is it's not just about how do these reps get dispersed in a game, but how these reps get dispersed in practice. Right, is going to be another key part to this, Ryan, which makes this whole thing very interesting. So,
and I almost wonder, Brian, if they play maybe a little even more odd front. It's possible, right? I don't know. I'm just I'm spitballing on top of my head. It's It's going to be interesting to see. But I think with Riley playing a little bit more inside, with Chris Smith playing more again, and Gabriel Rubio starting to get more snaps, I think again you can manage this loss. But to your point, I'm going to be interested to see how exactly they give those reps away, right? How they manage the workload. Because to your point, if someone gets hurt, then you're in a tough spot. Yeah. So we'll see what they do with supplementing.
That's right. So Ryan, let's move on to our next topic. And that is the fact that Notre Dame has a big game coming up this weekend against BYU. This is, as we've said all week, this is a huge game for Notre Dame. Huge game for Notre Dame. You need this win. And not only do you need this win, but you need this win to be an impressive win. It doesn't have to be a blowout, but it needs to be a win where you look good winning, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I think it's a challenge for the Notre Dame defense. It's going to be this is a well-coached team for the most part at BYU. This is a veteran team at BYU, very veteran team, return a lot from last year's roster, which we've I don't think we've talked enough about, outside of running back, that this team brought back a lot from last year's team.
Yep.
Running back and some good offensive linemen, but, pass game, they brought back almost everything. Injuries have kind of sapped it a little bit, but the roster brought it back. Defensively, they brought back a lot from last year's team. So very experienced team, very proven team. So this is an opportunity for Notre Dame to test themselves, Ryan, and come away with a victory. And so what we're going to focus on today, or move now, is some of the things that we think Notre Dame needs to do in order to win this game. And, they're keys to success, keys to victory, things that we need to see on both sides of the ball that are going to allow Notre Dame to come out with a much-needed victory in this game. So, Ryan, I want to begin with the offensive side of the ball.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to go 4 keys to victory on the offensive side of the ball. And there's going to be a common theme to both sides of the ball when it comes to keys to victory, Ryan, which you and I kind of set up yesterday. And, that is it's going to be the line of scrimmage, right? But so we're going to have some of that stuff through. We're going to have some big play themes through. But I think there's a bigger picture aspect to the importance on offense, Ryan, that even goes beyond that kind of incorporates all the next 3 things that we're going to talk about. And that is, I really think it's important for this Notre Dame offense to start fast. And I'm going to explain it. And there's 2 reasons why, Ryan, and you tell me what you think. Number 1, practically speaking, it's good for your offense to jump on BYU to then put pressure on the BYU offense. As you and I stated yesterday, we don't believe this team is as good of a play from behind team as North Carolina is, right? For a host of reasons. And one of those is we don't think they have the ability to be that, okay, just next play, you've been shutting them down, bam, 80-yard touchdown. You're shutting them down, 70-yard touchdown. They don't have that ability the way that Notre Dame, that North Carolina had, especially if Puka Nacua is not healthy or doesn't play. So I think that's a big part of it. They're not a great play from behind team. And number 2, and this is more big picture, Ryan, and maybe even more important to me, this offense is still, to me, a little bit of a fragile football team psyche-wise. Yes, the North Carolina game was good, but I'm still worried that if they come out and struggle and all of a sudden we see flashes of early Cal, Marshall, Ohio State, that the confidence that they gained from Carolina could quickly go away if they're getting punched in the mouth and not having success against BYU. Now, I don't mean if they go 3 and out the first drive, it's, oh, here we go again, we suck. But,
right.
If they kind of have a slow first quarter, first half, that could create some problems. Now, again, they didn't start fast against North Carolina, but again, that's because we started to see some of the stuff we saw before. We don't want to see that again. We need to see this team kind of come out and say, hey, we gained the confidence last week. We've built it through the bye week. Now we're ready to get rolling. That's another reason. And I think if you can get that confidence early, BYU is going to have a very hard time stopping this Notre Dame offense if they come out confident and start executing at a high level and come out right away and just kind of swarm them. I think that's going to be hard for BYU to handle.
Well, we talked about it yesterday, Brian. Like this is a unit where Notre Dame has struggled the first couple games, especially offensive line wise. So it was a situation where I think there's 2 outcomes. You come out and you just have early success, and it just kind of reiterates like, hey, we can do this, man. Like, we're all right. We can do this. We're a good offensive line. We're a good running game. We're a good offensive unit potentially. Or it's deflating early on and things get hard again. And then you kind of have that come back to reality type of moment where it's like, oh, maybe we should be second guessing ourselves. Maybe the defensive line was more the problem, or the defense was more the problem last week, 2 weeks ago, than what our offense is actually capable of doing. So I think that is a big part of this test. I mentioned it yesterday early on. I will know a lot of this team, at least running the football wise, very early in this game. First couple drives, I will have a big indication of if this team is truly heading in the right direction or if North Carolina is just that bad. I think it's one or the other. I don't necessarily think that, well, I think it could be somewhere in the middle, but the matter of fact is I think from a mental standpoint, that's where it's going to be for this team. Either they're going to capitalize and keep the momentum running, or it's going to be kind of back to reality a little bit.
I think key number 2, Ryan, and this is what we talked a lot about early and we hinted at before, the line of scrimmage is going to be very important in this game. And, we went away from establish the run, and we're going a little bit broader to establish the line of scrimmage, because it's really important. And not only do they establish the run, that's point number 1. Like we talked about it yesterday. They've got to come out and run the football because that's who this team is. They're not using their best weapons all of their best weapons in the pass game. Hopefully that changes in this game. I hope we see that. But as of right now, it's not happening. We're not seeing Tobias Merriweather. We're not seeing Elaborate and Holden States being used in the pass game. They're starting to use more. We saw the backs be more involved the last 2 weeks. Lorenzo Styles stepped up. Mayer's always been a big part of it. They're not using enough. So one way to complement that or counter that is to have a really dominant ground attack. That's who this team needs to be. So early in the game, it's important to come out and do that. It does a lot of different aspects to it, Ryan. We talked yesterday about you need to have early down success. Establishing line of scrimmage in the run game does that. It allows you to move the chains effectively. It allows you to force BYU BYU doesn't like to put numbers in the box. Like, I actually think to some degree they're okay giving up 6-7 yard gains. They're okay with you running for 200 yards if it's on 50 carries. I really believe that they believe that because then they can keep the points down a little bit and let their offense win. I think that they take kind of an approach that Notre Dame under Clark Lee took against USC. I want USC to run the ball against us. That's what Clark Lee's strategy was. Please run it against us because that's not what you do best. I think a lot of – and BYU kind of has that mentality where they feel like they can rally to the ball and limit the big plays in the run game, which protects them and their overall lack of really top-level athleticism on the perimeter. And so if you establish the run and you force them to kind of condense their backers, force them to bring their safeties even more down and focus on the run game, that's how you can then set up some big plays in the pass game. But that's also the second key to this, Ryan, is there are going to be some pass game opportunities and needs in this game. Establishing line of scrimmage also entails giving Drew Pine time to throw the football because that then ties into point one, which is Drew Pine's got to start hot fast too. He's got to keep building on that confidence. He clearly became more and more confident in the North Carolina game. Like when he took off running on that 12-yard gain on 3rd and 8, you could just kind of see a little bit of a pep in his step. And his execution just immediately, like, he's like, you know what? Hey, I got this, right? I'm going to be okay, right? Like, and then all of a sudden Drew's like, bam, 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 ball's going where it needs to go. I think we need to see that again too, but the line's got to give him the time that it did not give Tyler Buckner against Ohio State, that it did not give Tyler Buckner against Marshall, that it did not give Drew Pine early against Cal, to be honest with you. If they can give him that time as part of his establishment line of scrimmage, then I think it's going to be very, very hard for BYU to have a chance to win this game. Because if you're not getting pressure on Tyler Buckner, eventually the Notre Dame receiver is going to come open. And Drew's going to get the ball where it needs to get to, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree, Ryan. I think that for me, we've seen over the 4 games, right? When the offensive line plays well, everybody else plays well, right? Like, I mean, that's something that no matter what era of football you were in, right? Where it was a heavy run game, triple option, whether it is now with the wide open spread,
it's true in Mike Leach's we never run the ball offense too, Ryan. You're absolutely correct.
100%. The one thing that is always true, no matter what offense you come from, no matter what area you come from, is if your offensive line plays really well, your offense is probably going to do pretty well. Like, that is just the point blank, man. It's always a key to victory for every team. It doesn't matter what the emphasis is, what your run pass split is. It doesn't matter what scheme you run. Offensive line dictates and gives you a very good indicator of how your offense plays, right? And how you win football games, really. Like, that's why most teams still are built inside and out. That's how teams win. So I think it's huge because sorry, I just accidentally muted myself. On paper, Notre Dame has now you're muted, telling me something while I'm muted.
No, like, that's weird. Like, we both just got, like, I didn't hit the mute button. So, like, it happened right after you. Like, you're in the middle of talking and you get muted, which I was going to laugh as a first. And then all of a sudden I got muted while I was talking. So I have emailed StreamYard this week.
Maybe StreamYard muted both of us.
I now have something new to email StreamYard about and be annoyed about this week. No,
I have no idea.
Please continue before that crazy interruption.
No, I mean, I was at the end of the point anyway, right? It's a simple fact of Notre Dame's offensive line has the chance to be a tone setter for this football game. And that happens every single week. And it is incredibly true in this week because I think that BYU's defensive line is not a great unit. I think there's a couple individual players that I really like, but I don't think it's a great unit overall. And I think Notre Dame has the advantage there. So let's see if it comes to fruition. But I like Notre Dame's chances if the offensive line plays really well, as I will every single week until the end of time.
Notre Dame can beat every single team they play this year in the regular season if their offensive line plays well. It doesn't guarantee a win. It just means they can. Now, of course, if the offensive line plays great and the quarterback still throws 4 interceptions, you're going to lose. My point is there are teams they can't beat if the line doesn't play well. They can't beat Clemson if the offensive line doesn't play well, unless the Clemson offense plays even worse, right? Like there's always exceptions to those type of things. But if they play well, they can play with anybody on their schedule, in my opinion, every single one. So we'll find out if that's true. I think the third thing is, Ryan, is part of the fast start, part of control line of scrimmage is about creating an efficiency on offense. That's going to be very important. And one of the things that those things play into is being good on third down, right? Which we talked about yesterday. And we didn't want to just repeat all the things that we discussed yesterday. But first down success is important. Third down success is important. Efficiency is going to be super important in this game. However, if Notre Dame is going to beat BYU and, more importantly, set themselves up for a run coming out of this game, they're going to have to do more to create big plays. And I'm not talking about like 35-yard gains and 20-yard touchdowns, big plays in the red zone. I'm talking about they have to scare teams a little bit with big plays, which means run game big plays and pass game big plays. In my opinion, there's something that Tommy Rees said yesterday in his press conference, or it would be Tuesday now in his press conference, that I did like. Some of the comments he made after the press conference and the one-on-ones with media I didn't like, but what he said in the press conference was he felt the pass game actually helped the run game. I think he's right. North Carolina was not showing respect in Notre Dame's pass game. That allowed them to hit some big play opportunities, which then softened up the North Carolina defense, allowed Notre Dame to start attacking the middle of the field more and start attacking the perimeter a little bit more, and it made for a really balanced offense. But right now, part of the reason that Notre Dame doesn't have – I had a friend of mine ask me – I think I might have said this in yesterday's show, Ryan, or I just told you on the phone. But this is why we got to stop talking so much on the phone and talking ball, because I can't remember what we talked about on the phone. And Sean and I have the same problem, or what we talked about in the show. But he asked, he said, I don't know if Audric Estime, has enough speed to be a big play guy. I said, well, what makes you say that? And he goes, well, he hasn't really ripped off any big runs. And I was like, well, he does have a 36-yard catch and a 29-yard against Carolina. I said, well, let me ask you this. Do you think Chris Tyree has big play speed? He goes, oh, absolutely. I said, well, what's Chris Tyree's longest run of the year? He just kind of paused, like, that's a good point. Big runs are not just about the offensive line. If the offensive line does their job and opens up a huge hole, but they are not respecting your perimeter ability at all, those safeties are standing there at 8 yards. Yep. And it's a lot harder to rip off those big runs. A lot of the big runs that we've seen in the past were because you did have to respect Javon McKinley one-on-one outside. You did have to respect, Cole Kmet or Chase Claypool or, whoever the different tight ends have been for Notre Dame, Michael Mayer, Tommy Tremble, all those different type of guys that had shown the ability to kind of hit plays down the field. Well, I guess I shouldn't add Michael Mayer to that make plays down the field category, because they haven't really used him to do that yet. But the point is there were other things to worry about than just the run. And even in 2017, you had to worry about Brandon Wimbush throwing the ball over your head. You had to respect it, and you had to respect Brandon Wimbush running outside. So there was other weapons that you could worry about other than just the inside zone. Well, they don't have that kind of running threat at quarterback. So Tommy Rees is going to have to find ways to generate big plays down the field in this game, not trick plays like a boot. That was a great call. Great call. That's an important piece of the offense. This isn't to diminish that or the wheel route to Logan Diggs at all. But you just can't always go to those things every single game. Like, you kind of use those bullets in this game, and you may not be able to use them again for a few games, right? But you are going to have to show the ability to throw the ball down the field successfully. That comes from 4 different things, Ryan. Number 1, scheme. You got to scheme it up. Part of that is get your 6'4" tall kid on the field and let him catch some balls in one-on-ones, right? Okay.
Who are you talking about?
Tobias freaking Merriweather. It also means things that we talked about yesterday. Using your own self-scouting to say, we have not thrown hardly at all to our number 2 tight end. And in 2 of the throws that we did throw to our number 2, I think they've attempted 3 targets to their number 2 tight end. 2 of them were on plays where he was wide open. Ohio State, play action pass, and then on a bootleg against Marshall. So use your own self-scouting that teams are going to know of you. Use your own sort of tendencies to your advantage. Yep. So out of 13 personnel, 12 personnel, especially if you go 12 personnel in a 2 tight end look, and then maybe you motion Mayer across into a trips, they're probably not paying attention to that backside guy. So you do that a couple times and then run inside zone. where Mayer secures the backside, like make a real obvious Mayer's motioning and bam, he's securing that backside edge. And then a couple times later, use that and run a bootleg throwback to the tight end, or you run a pass where you play action and, you got Mayer running this way. And then you got Eli Raridan running a wide fade or a seam or a post backside. And you look for that throw where you're using your scheme, stacking your receivers, running some post snap switches, doing some things where you clear out and get Braden Lindsey on a drag route. There's a lot of things they can do schematically to get guys in space. And I'm talking about down the field space, Ryan, a climb route, a post route, a wheel route, a seam route, something to where the team has to say, hey, if you get too aggressive against Notre Dame, they're not going to throw the ball deep all day. They're not. But if you get a little bit too peaky into the backfield, Reese is going to come up with something to throw it over your head, and Pine's able to hit it. That's part number. Well, they're able to protect it. It's part number 2. The quarterback's able to hit it. That's part number 3. And they're going to have their best players on the floor. That's part number field. That's part number 4. So scheme, line protection, quarterback making the right decision and getting it out there, and then having the right players in the field that can make those plays. Those are all the key components to this that we need to see against BYU, Ryan, because I'm just telling you, in this game and in future games against Clemson, USC, you are going to have to throw the ball down the field. Yep. And if teams don't respect that, then your running game is always going to have a cap on it, in my opinion. And so that's going to be a big part of that. It's going to be a big key component to Tommy Reese's game plan this week is what can they do to generate plays down the field. I'm curious to see it because I think there's a lot of, boy, this would work and that would work, and boy, this would be interesting and that would be interesting, Ryan. I want to see what he does. Because this right here, this is his wheelhouse, this kind of stuff, Ryan. This is where Tommy Reese has been good, with the exception of a couple games early last year and the first 2 games of this year. Last 2 games, he's been pretty good about this stuff. Because part of the reason I said number 2 and 3, Ryan, there were guys open deep against Ohio State and Marshall, and they didn't get time to throw. And in other instances, they had guys open deep, and the quarterback missed. So it's not like they haven't tried. I'm not saying they haven't tried. Against Cal, they didn't try. I kind of understood it, right? In games 1 and 2, they tried. Against Carolina, they tried. So I'm not ripping on them for not trying. It's just now about let's see them have success with it. That's where I'm coming from in this one.
It's going to be interesting, man. I'm very curious on which 6'4 plus freshman pass catcher gets the first catch of his career. Will come this week, Brian. I'm excited to see it, man, because, hey, you mentioned the second tight end, right? Eli Raridan, fastest 10-yard split in NFL history, and he's not even in the NFL yet. So it's I
thought we were past it, and you brought it back.
Oh man, you got to come back to it.
And Ryan brought it back in. I love it.
Oh man, but I agree with you, man. I think that especially because Brian, let's be honest. If I'm BYU's defensive coordinator right now, I'm saying Caleb Hayes, I think, has just going to win one-on-ones against any receiver that he's against, right? Like, that's my mindset, because Notre Dame hasn't shown at this point that they can win those one-on-one matchups consistently for the variety of reasons that you kind of highlighted. And I think that you have to show that you're able to win some of those, whether it's Lorenzo, whether it's Braden, whether it is Tobias Merriweather, whether it is whoever. You have to show that you can create an explosive play against some of those better pass coverage players like Caleb Hayes, because I think they're going to have some one-on-one opportunities, because at this point, based upon what you've seen, you have to feel, if you're BYU, you have to feel good about your defensive backs against Notre Dame's offensive players or offensive skill position players. So that is a massive matchup. I agree. Let's get one of these freshmen a pass, man.
Sure.
Want to see it. I want to see it.
Ryan, this kind of ties into our 4th point, and that's something that we try to do here is because you do this when you're building a game plan, right, Ryan? Especially as an offensive coordinator. Your game plan is designed to kind of everything builds on each other, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what I hate is when I see offensive coordinators, and you can do it a little bit more in the NFL than in college, where it's like, okay, out of this look, they run this stuff. Out of this look, they run that stuff. And it's just kind of like none of it goes together, right? Like, it should all go together. What you do formationally and with your different pre-snap looks in the run game is stuff you should use in the pass game. Stuff you're going to use in the pass game, you need to find ways to use in the run game from a looks and alignments, a movement standpoint. So that way teams aren't like, hey, look, when the running back lines up here, he's running either outside zone here or he's running a pass route. Well, the key to outside zone is where's the tight end. So when he's here and the tight end's there, you know what's coming. It's a pass, right? When he's offset and the tight end's here, this is what they're doing. Like, you can't have those tendencies. And Notre Dame has had those problems in the past, especially, before Chip Long showed up. So you got to make sure all that stuff works together, right? And so I think a lot of that's how we do our keys, right? A lot of stuff kind of builds on each other. And I think the fourth key is if Notre Dame is going to win this game, obviously Mayer needs to be a dude, and you need Lorenzo needs to play well, but I think this is a game where you're going to need your complementary players to step up and make some plays.
Yes.
We saw that against North Carolina. Logan Diggs, who didn't even play the game before, has made very little impact so far this season, steps up and has the best game of his career against North Carolina. Now, I hope that's a springboard to Logan continue to do that week after week after week, as well as Audric doing what he did and Tyree doing what he did. And then some weeks you're just going to ride a hot hand. But, a Logan Diggs, a Braden Lindsey, who I have always felt is a complimentary player. It's a dangerous compliment, but he's a complimentary player. You got to do some things to get him going in this game, in my opinion. If other teams are not afraid of him doing things to hurt you or not afraid that you're going to scheme him, right? It's one thing for him not to make a lot of catches, another thing when you're clearly not scheming for him to do stuff that he's dangerous in. That's something I need to see. Eli Raridan, you talked about, or Holden Stace. If it's Holden Stace that they designed stuff for this week instead of Eli Raridan, or if it's Kane Barong, I don't care. It's not so much just about Eli Raridan. I mean, obviously Eli Raridan presents some unique opportunities at 6'7" and 245 pounds with the fastest 10-yard split for a tight end in the history of the world. I'm just not going to let that go this season. We'll get rid of him the offseason.
We need to make shirts about this. We need to make shirts.
Yeah. So what that, but I don't care if it's him. Holden Stace is really dangerous. If it's Tobias Merriweather, it'd be great to see Tobias get a couple shots. My point is complementary players across the board, and that includes offensive line. Look, Josh Lugg and Zeke Correll are not the studs up front. They're not the stars. They got to play well, though. It's important that they play well. So I think those players this week more than other. I think to win big games, you don't need your complementary players to play well to beat Cal or Marshall. You just don't. But you do need them to make plays against Ohio State in more than just one. You do need them to make plays to beat BYU. You are going to need those guys to step up and make plays to beat even a team like North Carolina. I mean, we saw that with Logan Diggs. He's the guy that kind of got the offense going with that wheel route up the field. You need those guys to play well in these moments, and this is one of those games. I also think this is also a lot of my points, Ryan, and our points, I should say, are also forward-looking a little bit. Mm-hmm. The more players that you show future opponents that you better game plan for him, the better you're going to be, the harder you're going to be to defend. Right now, Notre Dame, you got to be worried about Mayer. You got to be worried about the running backs. Yes. I don't think I have to be worried about Lorenzo Styles yet. Not so much that he's not a good player, but they don't do a lot to scheme him into spaces like they did Kevin Austin late last year. I haven't seen that so far this year. Mm-hmm. So, schematically, you don't have to – you have to be prepared for him. Hey, he's a good player. Be on your game. But you don't have to be worried about scheming him, because of how Notre Dame is going to scheme for him. So do some things to make him a guy you got to prepare for. But then do things that you say, if you don't pay attention to number 0, they're going to do this. They're going to do a motion and stack him and do this. And they're going to do these other things to try to get him going. A now screen. Can we run a bubble screen for the love of all things holy? Can we get a bubble screen this year? Can we get a now screen this year? Can we get, something like that? Those type of things, Ryan, the more you do that to your complementary players, the harder it is for teams to defend you. And that's why I think it's important against BYU, but it's also going to be important to put this on film for the rest of your season for future opponents.
Brian, you were a coach. What do coaches want when they're calling an offense or defense? They want options, right? Like that's what you want, especially offensively, man. Like I want to be able to look at a play sheet and say that play will work, that play will work, that play will work, that play will work, because I know that my options that I have are making plays, right? Like to your point, there's only a couple players in this offense that you feel consistently good about that if you dial it up, they're going to make plays for me. And if those complementary pieces come to play, then that just opens up the playbook for everyone, not just the coaching staff, not just the quarterback, for all these wide receivers that we've been talking about that have potential, that haven't put it fully onto the field yet. If they are able to do it in this week, then that gives them more options as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing who will take that next step up. Because like you said, Audric Estime the last couple of games to start to really step up. Logan Diggs last game really step up. Is it going to be Braden Lindsey? Is it going to be Lorenzo Styles at a more high volume level? Is it going to be Tobias Merriweather? Is it going to be tight end 2? Is it going to be Deion Colsey? Like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't care who it is. It just needs to happen. There needs to be more options on this offense.
Right. Yeah, and you need to have options, but options that hey, I've got this that I can go to get this guy going. And I think that's going to be an important part of what Coach Reese has got to do is you got to have some stuff that hey, I know Matt Salerno can get open on this. And we saw that against North Carolina. They designed a play where, let him run a slide, and it ended up turning into an angle route, but it wasn't designed that way because Drew Pine missed him at first. If you know the play I'm talking about, like he was actually wide open on the slide, and Drew just missed him. You saw that play in the all-22, right, Ryan?
Sure
where
did.
he's just wide open. And then Matt did a great job of working back to get into Drew Pine's line of sight. Like, this is why we say we've never advocated for put Matt Salerno on the bench and never play him. I've never advocated for that. It's not an either or. It's both and, right? That's the whole point. I've never said put Jaden Thomas on the bench and don't ever play him. I'm just saying use him in a more limited role and use him in areas where he's making plays, and don't ask him to do these other things because he's not good at that right now, and use this other kid who is good at those things and use him more. And that's kind of the point that we're making here. And and it could be Deion Colsey. I mean, we don't often talk about Deion because I'm uncertain of his health at this point in time. Like, I know he played 4 snaps against North Carolina, but is he ready to do anything other than block? I don't know what his health status is. It could be him. I mean, if they put him out and do the things that I'm asking them to do to Tobias Merriweather, and Deion plays and makes big plays, great. That's fine, because Deion Colsey's got a lot of talent too. It's just you need to get those guys into the game, and that's the point. But it doesn't mean, Matt Salerno sucks or whatever. But Matt did his job on that play, right? The times they asked Jaden Thomas to do his job on things he's comfortable with, guess what? He made the catches and got yards and did what he needed to do. And that's the thing too. And I also want to see I am curious to see, this isn't necessarily key to the game, Ryan, but I'm very curious to see how they use Lorenzo Styles this week.
Yeah.
As we've discussed, if I'm doing my self-scouting, I'm going to notice, boy, Lorenzo just statistically the last 2 years has been just way more productive in the slot. So do you use him more that way? And Ryan, I think there's an interesting thing that you brought up that it's not really a key to the game, but when you kind of look at the points, that points 3 and 4 of the offense, there's a really interesting kind of connection that kind of weaves through those as well. And that's what you and I were discussing before the show.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, Brian, like if you're asking me what the strength of this team is, or the part of the team I think that presents the most conflict potentially is the second level of the defense, right? Like, because you mentioned Ben Bywater, you mentioned Peyton Wogar, you mentioned Tooley, you mentioned what was
talked about Peely yesterday.
Peely, the big thumper inside. Peely. So they have options on the second level at linebacker. They can present a lot of multiple type of looks with those guys. I mean, there's 2 to 3 linebacker looks that you can use. There's even 4 linebacker looks that you can use at times because they have very different skill sets. And I think for me, and this comes to the creativity of Tommy Reese that we have seen at points, right? You have to conflict that second level, and you have to make people kind of overcompensate from some mistakes from the second level, because that hurts that hurts the safeties behind them having to overcompensate if they've taken a bad run fit or they've kind of chased a mesh route, a little too far outside the hashes, all that type of stuff. So I want to see them really manipulate the second level. How do you do that? Screens, crossing routes, play action. I want them to mess with their eye discipline. And if Notre Dame's able to do that, like we saw a little jet sweep action, we saw a little touch pass action, we've seen a little bit of screens throughout the season. I want to see even more. I want to see them really challenge that second level and make them really conflicted with what they're seeing and how they're responding of their plan of attack. Because I think if they take advantage of that second level and make them guess wrong, I think that is a big opportunity against what is a strength of this team.
Well, no, you talk about it, Ryan, and like you talk about the strength of this team. It's a good point for you to bring up just in just a general matchup standpoint, right? Like it against this particular team, it makes a lot of sense to bring it up. But I think the last thing you said is why it's such an important point, and that is that it also fits with what your strengths are, which is tight end talent and depth and running back talent and depth. And the more you can emphasize those with those guys, but it's always not just about using them to be the guys to threaten the linebackers for plays, but it's also about using them, knowing the linebackers are going to key them to then get somebody else open behind them. That's another key, run Mayer on an option route and have him run right at the mic and then have an angle route with your running back. And why are you doing that? Because you're trying to bang the in cut or the climb behind it, right? I mean, there's other aspects to that as well, but then also doing things to then stress those guys with the running backs and with the tight ends, so like something I would love to see Notre Dame do a little bit of this game is to kind of, you can do it out of 12 personnel, Ryan, is you can have 12 personnel. You can put, Michael Mayer into the boundary, and you can have the running back to his side, and you could be like in a 3-by-1 alignment out of two tight ends attached or one in a wing. But you have twins to your right. You have Mayer to your left. It could be, I'm just drawing it up as to the left side of the, to the left hash, but you have Mayer as your single tight end, and you have the back on his side. And what you do is you just run Mayer on a seam route, and you run the back on like a wheel or like a wide fade, or you can run the Mayer on a wide fade and then just run a trail with your running back. But then you're really trying to isolate those linebackers. And what you're trying to do then is bring somebody else back across from the other side, whether it be the tight end or the tight end may run an in cut, and then you bring a receiver underneath. The point being, if they overplay the back and the tight end, that's why you're actually using Mayer as a decoy, unless they go one-on-one, then you throw him the freaking ball down the field. But in that instance, you're using him as a decoy, you're using your running back as a decoy, right, to get them to overplay that, bringing something behind to replace it, right? But you're stressing that second level to your point. And then you've got some kind of over the middle, high, low coming behind it, right?
Yep.
And so I think there's a lot of things like that they can do. And because of the wide fade and the cross, you have some built-in blitz beaters, because what I just advocated for is an empty personnel, right? Meaning you vacate, it's all out, okay? And so it's a 5-man protection. So the crosser, the quick crosser, is a bit of a blitz beater, as is the wide fade, depending on where the blitz comes from. So you are doing things to protect yourself out of that, but you're also then using your best personnel that teams are worried about to then set something else up, right? And that's the kind of stuff that I'd like to see too, Ryan, which fits right in with what you talked about, which is stressing the second level of their defense, and not just doing it with your studs, but then also doing it with your complementary players. And that's a way where you could catch Braden Lindsey in a catch and run in that situation that can go for 25. And if he can make one guy miss, it could go for 50, right? Same with Lorenzo, same with, Matt Salerno. You'll get Matt Salerno. Use him like, hey, there's no way they're going to design a play for Matt Salerno. Hey, you know what? That's how you steal yards with your complementary players, right? Are they going to really think you're going to run a wide fade with your tight end and a trail with your running back, and you're going to send your other tight end on the seam so you can open up a crossing route to Matt Salerno? They're probably not planned for that, which is exactly why I could see it, right?
Yeah.
It's about using your complementary players to steal yards, because now your future opponents can, hey, you can't overplay Mayer or this guy, because we'll hit you with Lindsey, we'll hit you with Salerno, we'll hit you with Styles, we'll hit you with whatever. And that's the stuff I like to see, Ryan. I just think stuff like that, where you're really getting creative, are ways that you can steal yards in a game like this, and then put something on film that your next several opponents are going to be like, hey, we can't just do this because Notre Dame has figured some stuff out, which is what we saw last year. It took them a little longer last year. I hope it doesn't take them 7 games to figure it out this year.
Yep.
It needs to have taken 4. It needs to have been figured out now. Because when you look at last year's schedule, Ryan, we've talked a lot about how the offense figured stuff out late. But what was the way that all went about? Right? When you look at last year's schedule and they were able to figure some things out, when did it happen? It started to happen for USC, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which was after Virginia Tech, right?
Yep.
What happened in between there? Bye week.
True.
Right? That's when I say you get yourself scouting in. You figure out, okay, and what we saw them use personnel differently. They went from not using Styles hardly at all. Styles played like 8 snaps against Virginia Tech last year. Even after Joe Wilkinson got hurt the week before against Cincinnati, they still didn't use him. They used Deion Colsey a little bit, right? But they come out of the bye week, all of a sudden Styles is a part of your game plan. And what does he do against USC? Goes out there and makes plays, right? Makes some big plays for him. So, those are the things that you hope you see. Going into the USC game last year, Lorenzo Styles had 2 catches for 16 yards, right? He had a garbage 1 catch for 2-yard now screen against Toledo, and then he had a 1 catch for 14 yards coming off the bench for Joe Wilkins in the Cincinnati game, and then hardly played at all against Cincinnati. Come out of the bye, or Virginia Tech, excuse me. Come out of the bye week, all of a sudden he has 3 catches for 57 yards against USC, right? And makes some big plays. Then he comes out the next week against North Carolina, 3 catches for 74 yards. He only has 1 catch for 4 yards against Virginia, but he rips off a run that goes for over 50 yards. Now, and it only ended up being a 37-yard run. We've talked about this. It was a 37-yard run statistically, but it was actually a 50-something-yard run that had 15 taken away from it because of a downfield receiver hold.
Yep.
So maybe we see that again this year. I hope so. And that's what I love about bye weeks, but that's why we need to see some of that stuff, because those are, I mean, I thought Sarkisian in 2020 was masterful with Slade Bolden.
Yep.
I thought he would just do things where, like, if you're going to overplay this, then we're going to go steal a 20-yard gain with Slade, and then now you're like, okay, well, then you got to defend that. And then all of a sudden, okay, then you use your back off of it or whatever. That's what the best minds do. And I want to see Ty Maurice prove himself to be that. That's what I want to see this weekend.
I never thought I heard Slade Bolden's name on this podcast, Brian.
But they did, right?
I mean,
they did it, though. I mean, that's what we saw. It's like if you overplayed, especially when Jalen Waddle was healthy,
oh, yeah,
you'd see, Slade would catch like a pass or two, but it'd always be like that 15-yard gain where they just weren't prepared for him, or just like, okay, well, that was weird. Like, he comes out against Tennessee, he doesn't catch a single pass in the first 4 games. He comes out against Tennessee and he goes 6 for 94. Right? I mean, literally didn't catch a single pass the first 4 games of the year. Well, why didn't he catch a single pass the first 4 games of the year? Said Jalen Waddle. And then he got hurt, right? And they come out the first game without Jalen Waddle. What do? They go, Slade Bolden catches 6 passes for 94 yards. You know what I mean? Like, and you're like, oh, crap, now we got to deal with Slade Bolden. It's like wonderful. The SEC title game, he only had 2 catches in the SEC title game against Florida. But you know what? They went for 40 yards.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So it's stealing those yards to where, like, look, you want to overplay my dude, then we're going to steal from you. And I'm all for that. I'm not advocating stealing, only yards in football. So anyway, that's kind of where I would like to see this go. So
a little bit.
Let's move on to the defense, Ryan, and talk about the keys to success for the Notre Dame defense against BYU. I think the first one is obvious. They have to dominate the line of scrimmage. And this is in the first, and it's 2 parts to this one key. Part number 1, we discussed yesterday. We only spent a lot of time on it, but I do want to address it again. Controlling the line of scrimmage first and foremost means shutting down the BYU run game. Why do we keep talking, Ryan, about the importance? And I'm setting you up for this. I'm not setting myself up. I want you to answer this because I've talked about it in the past a little bit, but I want to hear you explain it. Why? Because this is what people are going to ask. Why are you so focused on shutting down BYU's run game when they're not a great rushing team and the best part of their team is the pass game? And that's a very important reason why, Ryan.
Because when you're a coach, you want to go against people that are predictable. Like, you want to be able to know exactly what's going to come at you, right? Like, that gives you more options, but it also gives you a better understanding of what's coming at you. And I think that when you make a team one-dimensional in general, like, again, you're just limiting how many things that they can do. And when they become predictable, that gives you the option to, hey, let's play this type of coverage. Let's mix this stuff up. Let's bring these different pressure packages. And you get to have a real, like, finite opinion, kind of understanding of, like, what do I need to do to be successful? Like, that's kind of where it goes for me. So I think that any team, you want to force them to be one-dimensional, no matter who they are. I mean, honestly, obviously, you would like to just shut down every aspect of their game. But against a good offense like BYU does have, you want to give them less options to attack with. And people probably are going to go like, wait, but why would I want to stop their run game when their pass game is what really scares you? It's because what gives you worry about a guy like a Jaren Hall, for instance, right? It's the fact that he is such a dual threat option, not even just as a runner, but as an extender in the RPO game, that type of thing, that you want to limit his options. Because the RPO game, if you know there's no run option, it just becomes a pass play, right? That's where this conflict happens, right? Like, that's where a defensive player's mind comes in. If you eliminate one part of the game, you have to only worry about certain parts of an offense. And to our point, when we first began this podcast, we both believe that BYU is not going to – I think that they can make some plays coming from behind, but I don't think that they're definitely not in the league of a North Carolina with the ability to create explosive plays and do that type of thing. So right. If I'm getting them into obvious passing situations, if they are obviously throwing the football, I will take the matchup of Cam Hart, even when he's struggling, against whoever, Gunnar Romney or whoever the wide receivers are, even Puka. Like, I'll take the options there. And if Puka doesn't play, then I'm definitely forcing them to pass because then I just kind of question of who are the secondary the second options for them also in the pass game.
Brian, point number 2, I think so. That's an important part. And then the second part of point 1 is if you're dominating the line of scrimmage in the run game for a good team or for a good line, which Notre Dame is, it naturally leads to pass rush and disruption. I don't care if they sack Jaren Hall once. I don't care. I mean, if they sack him 9 times, that's great. Sure. But I don't define success in this instance as a bunch of sacks. I want constant disruption. I don't want Jaren Hall getting comfortable. You've seen it on film. The stats bear it out. And this is true for most quarterbacks. When you consistently pressure them, especially if you pressure them with 4 or 5, especially 4, they're not going to be very successful. That's true of almost every quarterback in college football. The great ones cannot get – now, we both think the world of Jaren Hall, but he's not an elite talent. He's not. He's not Trevor Lawrence. He's not C.J. Stroud. He's not Bryce Young. He's a really good, veteran, experienced college quarterback. If you can consistently pressure him, especially with your front, then you're going to have a lot of success in this game. Because what the premise was, we didn't say shut down the run game. We didn't say sack Jaren Hall is the key. We said dominate/control the line of scrimmage. Because you're doing that with your box, and that's going to lead to those accomplishments. And that's why it's important. Because if he gets comfortable in this game, BYU will move the ball and score some points. Not a ton, score some points. Some other things have to happen that we'll get into that talks about it. But, as you get into point 2, this transitions to point 2, Ryan, which is contain Jaren Hall.
Yes.
You do that by being disruptive up front, not letting him have run lanes to go through, but also not letting him sit and get comfortable in the pocket. Because if he's comfortable in the pocket or you're not being disciplined up front, he will hurt you with his legs and his arm. You've got to contain him. You contain him by being dominating in the trenches, but then also being disciplined within that. And then that kind of leads to point 3. So we'll kind of talk about all these together, Ryan, which is BYU is not good enough to just move the ball up and down the field and score 35, 40 points on Notre Dame. They don't have that kind of talent. They are very good schematically. They are going to try to do things to create mistakes. And if you make those mistakes, Jaren Hall will hurt you. And so control the line of scrimmage, which leads to containing Jaren Hall, which then leads to don't ruin all that by then blowing an assignment or making a mistake or not going with the motion or not seeing the levels or not seeing the screen or not seeing the pump and go and all that kind of stuff. Because you could shut them down, and then boom, you make a mental mistake and you're beat. And that's the difference between BYU and North Carolina. North Carolina schemed some stuff to get some big plays, but they had the receivers that can just kind of run past Notre Dame at times. BYU doesn't have that. It's all going to come from scheme, right? And if you're disciplined, then you can shut that scheme down. Oregon was disciplined against BYU. They didn't give up a lot of the big plays. Notre Dame has to be disciplined. If you do that and you control the line of scrimmage, points 1 and 3 lead to point number 2, which is containing Jaren Hall.
Oh yeah, that's it, man. It really, because Brian, I mean, honestly, if BYU is able to create a bunch of explosive plays against Notre Dame, it's a bad sign, man. Like that is a really bad sign because I don't think that they have. Especially if Puka Nacua doesn't play. If he doesn't play, then you're looking at this team and saying, I don't know where the explosive plays come from. Like, I don't think it's Chase Roberts. I don't think it's Gunnar Romney. I don't think it's Isaac Rex. Like, that's not how this team is built. But how this team is built is that Jaren Hall, as an extender, and when he feels comfortable in what he is doing, when he's comfortable in his own skin, he's a really good football player, man. Like, that's just the point blank to it, right? And I think that's my biggest thing too, Brian, is like the 2 players that worry me most on BYU's offense are Puka Nacua and Jaren Hall. Those are the 2 players, right? If Puka doesn't play, then Jaren Hall's the guy. Yeah. I almost just put a middle finger up at the screen, by the way, when I was going like this and counting, which would have been fantastic.
Real quick, the latest thing I read was from last night was that Puka was listed as probable. Okay. So I don't, that could
probably a limited role.
That could just be coach speak, not let Notre Dame know it or whatever. I don't know. All I'm just saying is that, we don't know if he's going to play or not, or if he does play, how healthy he's going to be. But to your point, him healthy is a scary weapon. He is the one guy they have that can create those big plays.
Explosive
But
plays, yeah.
that is still even done within scheme. And
Yep.
that's the thing is, if you're disciplined, like your point against the North Carolina game, yeah, Antoine Green is good enough to run by you. But the 2 touchdowns he had against Notre Dame were both off of mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Safety not getting off the hash with the proper angle, corner maybe biting on something he shouldn't have been on, a blown coverage on the second one. The first long gain that they had that beat Jaden Mickey, which set up a touchdown, was just a great ball and a great play. You're going to have those. I don't think BYU has that kind of guy consistently that can do that. So it has to be a situation where you're just not making the mental mistakes. Don't bite hard on the bubble screen pump fake. And it almost looks like he's like throwing an axe. He just does this, then you bite on it, and then he pulls up and he throws it over your head. You can't make those mistakes. You can't lose gap assignment integrity in the run game and allow Christopher Brooks to rip off a 40-yard run. It's unacceptable in this game. You know what I mean? So those are all keys to the game. And then the fourth one, Ryan, is just be disruptive. And again, it all ties together. If BYU's playing behind the sticks in this game, especially if you have early down success, when they try to run the ball, like this hurt North Carolina. North Carolina was able to rip off some runs on the first drive off scrambles, but they were playing behind the sticks even on that first drive. As soon as Notre Dame cleaned up the quarterback scramble stuff, North Carolina could not move the football in Notre Dame. It was like just until the game was already over. It was like 38-14, and they started scoring garbage touchdowns, right? And that's going to be a key in this game too. Get them behind the sticks. If you can get them behind the sticks, you're going to have a lot of success in this game. And that comes from disruption. Running first and second down runs into zeros and minuses. Those are all going to be key. Getting your hands up. I mean, Jaren Hall is not a super tall quarterback either. He's taller than Drew Pine, but he's not like a 6'5" guy. You've got some tall linemen. If you see that he's setting up and get your hands up, knock those balls down, and that's how you can create some of the disruptions that lead to being behind the sticks. But then number 2, those are the kind of things that lead to turnovers. Mm-hmm. Tip a ball at the line of scrimmage, and then all of a sudden Brandon Joseph steps in front of a floating ball and takes it back, something like that. That disruption is what I want to see. And again, it starts with the front. Be disruptive up front. It all ties together, man. And that's going to be a big key in this game. It goes back to don't letting them get comfortable, shutting down the run game. All of it ties together, man. It really does. Those are going to be keys to this game. And what do they all do? They're all geared towards limiting the big plays, the cheap yards. Don't let BYU do what we talked about on offense, which is steal yards. Right? You can't do it. If you eliminate that, then they're going to have a hard time scoring enough to win this game, in my opinion.
What does disruption do, whether it's against the pass or in the run game, Brian? It speeds up the playmaker's process, right? Like they got to kind of think quicker on their feet and kind of reevaluate things in a very quick manner, right? Like got to speed up their process. This BYU team is not incredibly fast offensively. They're not. Like they don't have a ton of speed. They have good football players, physical football players, well-coached football players, which you can win with, obviously. But when you create disruption against guys that are not the fastest or most explosive football players, when you speed up their process, that's where it gets really highlighted that, like, hey, they're not explosive playmakers. That's where it kind of comes into, right? So I think Notre Dame has a speed advantage across the board when we're talking about their Notre Dame's defense against the offense. I mean, it goes both ways if we're being honest, but I really do think that if Notre Dame makes this team uncomfortable, you're going to see the discrepancy between Notre Dame's speed versus BYU's speed. So I agree completely. Penetration is absolutely vital against the pass, against the run. Need to see them create some penetration and create some big plays in the backfield.
The optimism that I have that the Notre Dame defense can really slow down Jaren Hall is the fact of they did it against Drake May and CJ Stroud. I mean, if you really think about it, the 3 best defensive games Notre Dame has played this year came against the 2 best games Notre Dame played this year defensively, in my opinion, came against, especially pass game wise, came against the 2 best quarterbacks they've played. I mean, 2 of the best quarterbacks in the country so far. I think CJ Stroud, my stance on CJ Stroud. I think he is the best quarterback in the country. But it's an argument with him and Bryce Young. They're both great. Great. But you kept CJ from really dominating that game. You kept Drake May from really making the big plays to win until the game was basically over. You did it then. Now you need to do it again. And this is the danger of Notre Dame's schedule because you keep facing quarterbacks like that week after week after week. As bad as Stanford is, you let Tanner McKee get hot and they can give you some problems, right? Garrett Schrader, with his running ability and he's improved as a passer, he can hurt you. right? DJ is playing a lot better for Clemson, right? Phil Dracovic, if you don't beat up their offensive line, Phil Dracovic, as Louisville learned this last weekend, if you give Phil Dracovic time to throw the football, he will rip you up. The key to beating BC, be disruptive. Don't let the quarterback take over the game. And then, of course, there's Caleb Williams at the end of the year. So this is going to be a theme all year is you can't let this quarterback take over. And in my opinion, it's going to come down to all the things that we talked about, because you can't let Jaren Hall take this game over. The reason I'm optimistic about this game, and you'll see how optimistic I am tomorrow in the game prediction, is because we've seen this defense do this. My only concern about this game is what we don't know about the offense, because we've only seen them play once big, right? And that was against a bad defense. We've seen this defense shut down now 2 really good quarterbacks. And what does Drake May do a week later, Ryan? Right? I mean, he gets some garbage plays against Notre Dame, but he had some really rough periods against Notre Dame. I mean, some really rough periods. And so what does he do? He comes out the next week against Virginia Tech, goes 26 of 36 for 363 yards and 3 touchdowns, averages 10.1 yards per attempt.
He's a good player, man.
Oh, and by the way, he also added 73 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. That's what Notre Dame basically shut down when the game mattered against North Carolina. So if they can do that to Drake May, with all due respect to Jaren Hall, who I'm a big fan of, they can do it to him.
Yes.
In my opinion. There's no doubt.
Agree with you.
Now, we got to talk about next, right, Ryan? Special teams, man. Keys to the game on special teams. I'm a believer.
It's going to be different this week. It's going to be different this week.
A little bit. It's going to be similar to the North Carolina game.
Yeah.
Always do your job. Don't make mistakes. Don't leave. The big one, though, that we're going to emphasize, don't leave points on the board, meaning like on the field. Don't miss. You got to make your 2 games in a row that the kickers missed a field goal. Now, they got a little fortunate against Cal, it would seem. I still haven't seen a right down the line angle of that play, but it seems that they caught a break against Cal, and his miss got negated by a penalty. You can't do that in a game like this. So you can't miss those opportunities. But I'm a big believer, Ryan, that at home, just do your job. Just don't make mistakes. On the road, I want to see the special teams make plays. And they did that against North Carolina. Now, did they have a 50-yard return for a touchdown? No. But the combination of consistent pressure on the punter led to then Brandon Joseph having room to run, which allowed them to really get, 50 yards in additional field position in that game? Didn't he have 50 yards return yards or something like that?
Yeah, I think he averaged 14 point something on 3 returns, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So
so those are things that you want to do, Ryan. That's because that's 50 extra yards of field position that you're getting in that game. And so, to me, I think those are really important aspects of it. Yeah, 3 for 43 he had in that game. And so, those are things you want to see. If you can block a punt, if you can block a kick, if you can take a kick back to the house, that's all great. But that's not the only way to have big plays in the special teams. Big plays are also force a punter because of pressure to shank 15 yards, or line drive one that Brandon, Joseph runs back and it's like a net 20-yard gain on a punt, right? Those are big plays in a game like this. And so the field position aspect is going to be very important for this football game.
100%. And it usually is, right? But I think for anything like what we have seen, Brandon Joseph now take a step forward as a punt returner and set your team up in good situations, right? And we talk about staying in front of the sticks as far as getting into 2nd and 5, 2nd and 4s, but you're also giving your team a lot more options when you start with better field position. You start getting into the 4-down territory type of opportunities. You start to maybe take a couple shots at certain points, right? So I think that field position gives you just a big bonus. And I mean, we'll see what happens, Brian, because I mean, we're talking mostly about punt return opportunities, but I mean, even in the kick return game, we know how dynamic Chris Tyree can be when he gets an opportunity. Haven't seen a big return really from him yet, so maybe this is the week. But I agree, right. Field position is just a consistent thing across the board, where if you win that battle, your offense is going to be in a good situation. You're going to be in a good situation.
Right. And just don't give up don't do the opposite of what we just talked about.
Yeah.
Don't allow them, BYU, to do what Notre Dame just talked about. I mean, I think that's a big key as well, because, when you look at it, Ryan, it's like that can always be that one thing that just kills you in a game like this, right? Oh my gosh, why are you allowing
it's deflating.
That? It's deflating. And if you look at BYU this year, I mean, they've given up a kick return for a score They rank 117th in the nation in kick return average. You had South Florida took one back to the house. It didn't impact the game, but you had one. But then Wyoming averaged 33 yards on their 2 kick returns, right? So a team. Here's where you can hurt a team like BYU. Their positive is that they're really smart and they're veteran players and they're tough, and so they can be good on special teams. The negative is, if we're being honest, they're not an overly athletic team, not to the level Notre Dame is.
Agreed.
And this is where you can, again, we talk about stealing yards, stealing points. Those things are important in big games. That's an area where, if you can find a way to leverage their speed against them, then that's where you can rip off some big plays. And so that's what I'm curious to see on special teams for this week.
And I think you mentioned a good point too, Brian, is the fact that bad special teams play can be demoralizing. Like we saw what happened against Wisconsin last year when Wisconsin let up one big kick return.
They had just taken the lead, Ryan. They had just taken the lead, Wisconsin had. And the energy, this is what I love about big plays. That's why I'll say this till I'll believe this until special teams changes to where it's no longer a part of the game. And I hope that never happens. But there is nothing more deflating than a special teams touchdown against you, whether it's punting, but even more so, the even more deflating ones are kick returns. I think that is kick returns and block punts to me are the 2 most deflating special teams plays and 2 of the most deflating plays in all of football, because there's just this stigma to like a block punt, especially if it's like deep, where it's like, boy, that can really hurt you. Not always, but a lot of times. And then a kick return usually comes after you just did something really good. I still remember the Stanford game of 2015 where Stanford took that opening drive and just went right there. I mean, Kevin Hogan just shredded the Notre Dame defense. And what happens? CJ Sanders brings that sucker right back, and just all the energy out of the Stanford crowd was just gone. Yep. Now, they ended up winning the game, but what happens if they don't do that? What if Notre Dame punts? All of a sudden, you're down to a really good Stanford team, 14-0, and then you're not winning that game, right? You're not even in position to win it, and you don't even put Brian Van Gorder in position to blow it at the end, right? But we've seen that before, right? And we've seen those type of plays, in the Wisconsin game being the most recent, where, boy, it really felt like Wisconsin had the momentum. The offense had been sputtering. You've got your backup quarterback in the game, and he just got hit and fumbled. And you think, oh, crap, this is not good. And you had outplayed them for a lot of that game. I mean, really outplayed Wisconsin, but you couldn't put points on the board. And then, bam, Tyree does that, and it's just like Wisconsin just was like all this wind out of their sails.
Well, even against Ohio State, it didn't end up killing us, right, Brian? From a Notre Dame perspective. But the fact that Notre Dame could get nothing going on the kick return and Ohio State's coverage unit was just flying, that was a little demoralizing, man. If we're being honest,
that's so. Ryan, you're not going to go on the road and beat Ohio State if you have to go 85 yards every time.
Every day. Yeah, all day. Right. It's awful, man. Brian, I think I might go to, sorry, this is just a random note because my mind is a little random sometimes. I have ADHD, so I can't really
I love about you.
Focus, man. I kind of want to go for Halloween as Brian Van Gorder this year.
Oh my gosh.
What would you think about that?
That'd be great,
so
right? Awesome.
Be good. I just see the garrote, the little goatee thing.
That'd be so great. That'd be so great. I've always wanted to do I wish that Notre Dame would do this, have a media thing where maybe one of the press conferences before trick or treat, maybe the Thursday press conference. Well, you can't do that because that's on Zoom. But maybe the week of Halloween, all the media. If you can't come into the Notre Dame press conference on Monday unless you're in your Halloween costume, because what I'm going as. I'm coming in as Brian Kelly, and that. And I'm going to get there early and I'm going to get up on the podium and just say some really obnoxious BS that Brian Kelly would say. That'd be a lot of fun.
Get your Southern accent ready, sir. Yes. You better start practicing.
Yes. Oh, because all my nonsense BS stuff would be said in my very Savannah accent. My Savannah accent I tried to pass off in the Bayou. Sure. Anyway, that's going to do it for this portion of the show. We are going to have a mailbag coming up, and we do have some questions already put in. If you all want more, you can throw those in as well. But we are going to get to some mailbag questions. But before we go to the mailbag, everybody, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, please. We would appreciate that. And if you're listening via podcast, we would really appreciate if you gave us a 5-star review. It would mean a lot to us. If you don't want to give us a 5-star review, and you have a complaint with the show, you can always DM me, but don't give us a review. We would really appreciate that. Shoot me a DM and tell me what you don't like about our show, and we can discuss it. So that would, as somebody said with the Brian Kelly thing, and your purple face paint. That'd be amazing. That'd be so much funny. So anyway, so that's going to do it for this show. Mailbag coming up next. And of course, as always, check out boards.irishbreakdown.com. We'll have a little bit more on the Jacob Lacy stuff coming up here later. We'll have some recruiting intel here over the next couple days as well. And we'll next week have a little bit more on what we have planned for next weekend on Saturday, the Stanford game. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. So if you're going to be on campus that day, make sure you pay attention to this. And if you're not going to be on campus today, or you're unsure you're going to be on campus that day, there's time to change your plans and get that going. Yes. So that's going to do it for this part of the Irish Breakdown podcast. So Ryan, as we give a slight pause so we can cut the show up here later, it's mailbag time. So let's dive into today's mailbag. And so you all can go throw in your questions and let us know kind of things that you want us to chat about. And we're going to dive into, we're just going to kind of go top to bottom here now. And we'll start with a super chat here. And this is from Hulk Strongest. He goes, "Hey guys, heard an interesting stat out of the top 20 receivers in last year's class, 18 of them have played more snaps than Merriweather. The only one that hasn't is because he is hurt." I haven't seen that, but it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if that's true. I mean, that's almost always true of Notre Dame freshman receivers, right?
I think I need to go take a look at that stat now that put it out there. But that's very interesting if true. Very interesting.
Yep. So we will appreciate the super chat, Hulk Strongest, of course.
I'm personally just happy that other teams have kind of worked past the dilemma that freshmen can't play. Like they got their they sent in their request to let these kids play early, and they got it approved, and they were good enough to get them on the field. It's crazy, man. I believe
the NCAA denied Notre Dame's request to play their freshmen and throw the ball to their freshmen. NCAA always jacking stuff up. Oh, goodness gracious. So next super chat or next question came from John A1. What's the larger concern? The offense struggling with Styles, Lindsey, and Thomas on the field, or Merriweather not getting an opportunity to play? Saturday they need to fix both, or at least one of them. But I think those two things kind of go hand in hand, Ryan. If you play Tobias more, it gives you another weapon in your arsenal, which then allows you to tailor everybody's package a little bit. You can then put Salerno in situations where you're not asking him to do things he's not comfortable with. You're doing that when you're not doing that with Jaden Thomas, and you're not doing that with Tobias Merriweather. I also think that it gives you another pure outside guy, which allows you to then also do even more with Lorenzo Styles in the slot. So I think those two things kind of go hand in hand. But the reality is I think that for me, it's still going to be Merriweather getting on the field, because he is your most he is your most talented receiver. He is. I've said this before the season, just grading him off of as a prospect, Ryan. He's the best receiver Notre Dame has signed since Michael Floyd, in my opinion, up to his class. And a guy like that not getting on the field as a freshman at all, I mean, 4 plays of nothing where you knew he wasn't getting the ball, is not getting him on the field. I still think that's the bigger issue.
I would actually probably pick the former on this. I think it's Styles, Lindsey, and Thomas, because I agree with you. I think that they are definitely interrelated, right? Like there's definitely parts that kind of fit together. But I think it's just the very easy part of, for me, John, you're talking about 3 players versus 1 player in that situation, right? If 3 players play well versus 1 player playing really well, then I think the 3 outweigh the 1. So I'm just going by the bigger volume potentially. So I'll say that the 3 not playing well is worse than the 1 not playing, in my opinion. But both are problems.
I think they're both problems. I think there's different ways to look at it, Ryan. There's no doubt. I just think the latter has a greater impact on the former than vice versa. Is kind of how I look at it. Best way to help the former is to do the latter, right? And that's the way I look at it.
To let guys get more opportunity, one-on-one opportunities and more space. And I get that.
Then you can use them in roles that they're more comfortable. And that's kind of the way I look at it. So
I agree with that part for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that very, very much.
We had a difference of opinion and we worked through it and we came to
we talked through it. We're still friends. I love it. Brian J. Irish says, B. Ryan, over under 1.5 that Notre Dame will complete a pass over 20 yards against BYU.
Over.
Yes.
Over.
Agree. I'm going to take the over.
That's an easy one, Brian.
We're talking about completing a pass over 20 yards past the line of scrimmage, not a screen that goes 20 yards.
Yes. Yes,
That's
20 plus air yards.
Correct.
Yes,
From the line of
yes.
scrimmage. Yes,
Yes.
from the line of scrimmage. Yes, I would agree with that. It's funny because I was watching a game from back in the 80s. It was a Broncos game. It was like during the summer. And I'm like, man, you had to throw the ball 25 yards in the air to complete like a 10-yard in cut. Back they take like these 9-step drops, and it's just like, man, it was like 15 yards behind the line. It's like insane. Not quite the case anymore. But yes, 20 yards past the line of scrimmage is what I would like to see. I think they'll go over. I think the question is, how many attempts is it going to take to get to that over? I think is going to be the more interesting aspect to this, Ryan, and the thing that I'm curious to see, because they went under against North Carolina, and because the only one that they hit was the one to Styles. I mean the one that Styles up the seam. They had some opportunities to hit bigger ones, and they missed them. And at one they didn't have the right personnel. A couple other times they missed. Because I think the throw to Mayer would have been 20 yards, more than 20 yards. The one that he threw at his feet on the wide fade. So yeah, they're going to have to start hitting some of those.
Yes.
Right. So we'll see. Irish Mojo with a question. He says, with the quarterback situation, and is the red shirt on Angeli thrown out the door right now? It isn't for me. No, the only way that you throw the red shirt out for Angeli is if Drew Pine gets hurt and he has to play more than 4 games. There's no reason to play Steve Angeli more than 4 games against this season. No reason to. And the reason and unless there's an injury. Now, you have to play him 4. Like, in my opinion, you have to get him, at least 3. I would say this. I'd play him in at least 3 games and then maybe save that 4th one for if, let's say Drew Pine gets hurt against USC or gets hurt in a bowl game, and you can still save that red shirt. That's what I would do, Ryan. I would definitely use him for 3 and then try to save that 4th. And then also you can play him in a bowl game if the need arises, if you get a chance to get him in the game. So I don't think there's a need to burn a year of eligibility to get him ready to play if his number's called. I think you play the 3 to 4 games to get him ready for that if his number's called, and you're smart about that. So that's my stance on that. And now, if we were in the old rules, I'd say, yeah, you got to burn it. He's got to get playing time. He can't. His first time playing can't be if there's an injury. You can't take that risk. But with the new rule where a kid can play 4 games and he can play it at any time in the year, which I think is a great rule, by the way. And we talked earlier, little side note, I think this is also why I hate the transfer rule. Because the transfer rule changing has opened up this thing where kids can now leave in the middle of the season. If Jacob Lacy had to sit out next year if he transferred, he's not going in the portal. It's not an option for him, and I don't think it should be. And just my opinion, and he could have a very legitimate thing going on right now. And I'm not. This isn't necessarily about Jacob, but he shouldn't be able to just do what he's doing and then play somewhere next. You quit on your team, whether it's justified or not. You should have to appeal the situation to get that year back, in my opinion, to transfer right away. Like, let's say there was something where a coach did something really bad, and this did not happen. Everything I've heard, this is not a thing where, let's say a coach, just flat out lies to a kid or does something really egregious or does something that, like, boy, that's just, you can't be in that situation anymore. You then appeal to the NCAA and you say, okay, look, we're gonna let this kid play right away and give him the year and all that kind of stuff. But if a kid just isn't happy with his playing time, as justified as that may be to him, to me, that is not a reason to leave your team and then just be able to go somewhere else right away. I don't like that.
Agreed.
And so, but I think the transfer rule has hurt what I think is a great rule, which is the 4-game red shirt. Right. And if there
people are manipulating it.
Yes.
Yeah.
The 4-game rule is great if the transfer portal rule is what it's always been, which is barring an exception, you can't just transfer right away because you don't like your playing time. Right. That's not a valid excuse to have you can transfer. I'm all for transfer. I transferred after my freshman year and I was a starter. But like, I'm all for kids transferring, and there's all types of different reasons to transfer, but playing time may be important to you. And I'm not dismissing that it's important to you, but it's not a rule. It's not something that should allow you to get a free waiver to go play somewhere else right away. It's just not for me. I don't buy that.
Yep.
And so, I think that rule has hurt what I think is one of the best things the NCAA has done in the last decade, which is allow kids to play right away. and play 4 games at any time. Because it used to be you could play 3-4 games, but you can't play past the 4th game of the year, and it has to be injury related. You can play the last 4 games of the year. And now kids can play bowl games. I think it's a great rule. It's one of the few things the NCAA's done the last decade that I think is great, by the way, Ryan. And I think that's for Angeli, it's a great opportunity to let him play, but not burn a year. Mm-hmm. And so you can do both. You can get him ready to play if his number's called, but you can also protect him and not burn a year of eligibility. Because if he plays more than 4 games this year, him and Drew Pine have the same exact number of eligibility moving forward, which is nuts.
Bizarre. Yeah. It is.
Because Drew's 2020 season didn't count because of COVID. And then he only played 4. He actually played less than 4 games last year, I think. So, So Drew Pine redshirted last year. Drew Pine is a redshirt freshman eligibility-wise.
It's crazy.
So if Steve Angeli burns a year of eligibility, then him and Drew Pine moving forward have the same amount of eligibility. And if Drew Pine doesn't leave, that really hurts Steve Angeli, in my opinion. It does. And it's not fair to him. So Milton Fan 15 says, Brian, would you like to see Chris Tyree or Logan Diggs see more snaps in the slot? Tyree, but not many more. I don't like the idea of putting either one of them in the slot a bunch. Mm-hmm. There are things you can do with them in the slot out of your 21 and 22 personnel that are very interesting. Who you would use, honestly, depends. I mean, like if I'm throwing a bubble screen, I'd rather throw it to Logan Diggs. He's more of a make you miss kind of guy than Chris Tyree, right?
I agree.
If I'm going to run a tunnel screen, I'm probably throwing it to Chris Tyree because I want him to catch it and split the defense with his speed. If I'm doing jet sweeps or I'm doing reverses, I want Chris Tyree. If I'm having someone run a downfield passing route, a crossing route, a drag, something like that, I'd want Logan Diggs. He's a bigger target, right? And, you miss on a 5'9" guy and that ball gets tipped and gets picked off. Logan Diggs has about 3 more inches on Chris Tyree. He's a more natural downfield pass catcher than Chris Tyree. So it would depend on what they're doing, Milton. I'd see it'd be fine. Both of them get some looks there in certain situations, but it's not something I want to be a full-time thing. If that, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's my thoughts. What are your thoughts on that, Ryan?
I would also I think it's situational. I mean, to your point, like I don't want either guy in there a ton, but I want Chris Tyree in the slot if I'm going to work some power read with him, right? If I'm going to work some jet sweeps, like that's going to be kind of his role in this offense. I don't really want Logan Diggs running jet sweeps and such, but to your point, like if I want a little more of a advanced route tree, then I think Logan's a better player in the slot. But I mean, right now I want to see Lorenzo Styles in the slot. Like that's who I want to see in the slot, right? Like I don't want to see those guys, but I do think that in certain instances there's some good validity to it. It's just depends what role you're looking for, right? Like again, if you want more of the gadgety run threat type of stuff, like I want Chris Tyree in the slot because I think he could do some jet motion stuff. You hand the ball, hit the outside, hit the crease, all that type of stuff. I think Logan Diggs, though, is a more natural all-around pass catcher than Chris Tyree. So if that's what you're aiming for, then it would be Diggs in those situations. But to the heart of the question, I want Lorenzo Styles in the slot. I want Michael Mayer in the slots. Those are the guys I want in the slot.
Yep. I want to respond to a comment that was just made that is taking this Jacob Lacy thing way too far.
Okay.
John Zabrowski says, I think the discussing NCAA rules skips the fact Lacy was arguably our best defensive player this year. Something's not right. First of all, you're commenting on something because you joined the show late and you're assuming we didn't talk about something because you didn't hear it. That's you, not us. We talked about how big of a loss this is. Number one, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can talk about how this is a loss and also talk about how we don't like the rule. That's allowed in grown-up world. Number two, that's way off. I'm sorry. Yeah. He had a great game against Cal.
Yeah, he's not been their best player.
I named him player of the game against Cal, but you could make a case that he wasn't their best defensive lineman in that game. There were a lot of – Jason Adamiola played great that game. Isaiah Foskey played great that game for the most part. Jacob played great that game. To say he's their best player on the defense this year, come on.
I can't even say he's their best interior defensive lineman this year.
No,
I would say it's Howard Cross so far, in my opinion.
Jacob has had a few more flashy plays. Howard Cross has consistently been better. And this isn't diminishing what Jacob has done at all. Because if you go back and listen to the show that you missed, we talked about this is a big loss. He's been a good football player for them this year.
For sure.
And it's a loss next year. Because now you don't have Jason Adamiola next year or Chris Smith next year. And now you also don't have Jacob Lacy next year. That is a loss. No one is spinning this, right? No one is spinning this. But we can do two things at once. But no, he has not been their best player this year. Yeah, there's no question. No question he's not been their best player. That doesn't mean, however, that we're saying it's not a loss, John. It is a loss. There's no doubt it is a loss. It has created it is a loss they can sustain as long as there are no other injuries. What are the odds you go through 8 more games and none of your big guys in the trash get injured? We've already seen Chris Smith get injured. Howard Cross is dealing with the thing right now. There will be an injury, and that's the damaging part. You're fortunate, and it doesn't mean it's a long-term injury. It could just be like Chris Smith's. He had an injury against Marshall. He was back the next week, played well, but he was knocked out of that game. That's the thing that hurts you, right? Yep. So there's no downplaying this being a loss on this show, none. But we can also say, why was this loss even allowed to happen? It's because of a stupid rule that was instituted in the NCAA, which continues to do more and more and more of turning the greatest team sport in the history of mankind into an individual sport. And I hate it. Yeah. And no one will ever convince me otherwise. And so, yes, we can do both. We can do both. And we will do both here. Beef Eater Indy 08, a.k.a. Toe Jam, 1992. Brian, how does Lacy leaving affect the chemistry in the locker room? Will it be a distraction for the team on Saturday? It can be. Will it? I don't know. I know that there's some unhappy players. There's no doubt, as you'd expect. I don't think the coaches are in love with the situation either. They're not happy about it. This is going to be a test for Marcus Freeman. He's going to have to find a way to make this to where it doesn't become a distraction. That's an important piece to being a head coach, Ryan, is this is a bad situation. Your players are upset, and it's happening late in the week. How do you address it? How do you create it from being a distraction? That's going to be something he's going to have to do. So what I would say, Beefeater, is does it affect the chemistry in the locker room? It depends on how the coaching staff addresses it. If they try to act like it's no big deal, it will create a problem in the locker room. If they address it and say, hey, look, this is what happened. This is why it happened. And we're going to this is how we're going to deal with it. And if you have an issue with it, come talk to me. Right? Then I think you can prevent it from being an issue in the locker room. But I don't know how Marcus Freeman is going to handle the situation because he hasn't really been in this situation before. It's like with a lot of the things that he's going through this year. Here's how I hope he'll handle it, but I don't know because this is his first crack at it. Yep. Right? So we'll find out. But it's a loss. It's a loss. You have to make sure that the personnel loss doesn't create a bigger problem. And that's what I think this is such a good question, Ryan, is because that is a danger when you have this kind of situation right in the middle of the year of a guy who's playing. If you don't handle it right, it can absolutely create an issue in your locker room.
Yep. And I want to see how the leadership handles it. And that's leadership from the coaches down to the leadership of the football players who are the captains, who are the leaders of the football team, because they all can have a say in trying to manage this. And I think that Coach Freeman and the captains, for instance, Brian, like they need to be on the same page with this one, right? Because I think Coach Freeman is wise enough to know that, he runs the program. He has the overlying, interpretation of how he wants his program to be run. But at the end of the day, the players have a big influence in this as well, right? So having guys around him like Isaiah Foskey and JD Bertrand and those leaders on the defensive side of the football to be one-on-one in understanding of like, hey, this is a loss. This is what happened. This is what we need to do now to step forward so we can get through this without muddling of this situation, right? So I think it's a leadership thing that needs to happen, and I'm interested to see how they handle it because, like you said, it's a first, but you do have a lot of experienced players in the defensive room that I think if they are the leaders that we hope they are, then I think they'll be able to get through this. But again, we'll see how it kind of works out.
Yeah. We had another comment down here about this too. And Irish Mojo 25 says, does Notre Dame still have a say in where Lacy can transfer? That is gone. And that is one of the good things that came out of the changes to the transfer. What I hated about the previous transfer rule, Ryan, was there was a couple things. The inconsistency of who they would and wouldn't give a waiver to, which was just weird. Like, remember that center? Who was it? Wasn't it the Bradbury kid? Wasn't he the one that transferred to NC? Or no, it was somebody that went to Virginia Tech.
It was Brock Hoffman went from Coastal to Virginia Tech. Yeah. Yep.
And there was, from everything we've read, there was a very legitimate situation, right? And he wasn't granted a waiver, but yet Justin Fields is. for some
Do you
reason.
remember Luke Ford, the tight end,
Yes,
when he transferred to Illinois? That was
one.
crazy. Yeah.
And then other kids are like, what? And then like Alohi Gilman gave one like that he had a very legitimate reason, right? Like he joined the Navy under the certain circumstances. The rules were changed under the previous administration, right? About, players and all, and that should have allowed him enough to go play right away. Now, and they didn't allow him to do that. Why? The inconsistency of the enforcement of the rule is really silly. And that's why I've made the proposals that I have to kind of, write language into the NIL that makes it a lot easier for kids to understand the circumstances in which they can and can't get out and get a one-time waiver. Yeah. That was one of my big rules. The other big rule is that schools could dictate where kids could go. That's wrong. I don't think that should have never been a rule. If you want to leave Alabama to go to Georgia or vice versa, then you should be allowed to do that. All I've ever said is, but you should have to sit out a year. That's what I've advocated for. But, Urban Meyer would do, you can transfer, but you can't transfer here, and here. Schools should not be allowed to do that. They should not be allowed to do that. And I'm glad that rule was eliminated. That is one of the positives. Now, you need to fix the one-time transfer thing and go take some of the positives of the new transfer rule, keep those, and then get rid of the thing that's hurt. Because if you want to put a big hit on tampering for NIL and college football, eliminate the one-time transfer rule for non-graduates. Eliminate that. And all of a sudden, why is USC's not calling Jordan Addison to try to get him a transfer if he has to sit out a year? They're not, because they're looking for a guy that can play now, right? Yep. And
Jordan Addison's also not going to transfer in that situation either.
Right. He's going to stay at Pitt for exactly. I should have added that. That's a great point, because he's going to be, he's eligible. Now, if he was only a freshman, like Mario Williams might still have transferred, right? Like he may still have transferred because he'd sit out a year, practice, and then he's a junior playing in Lincoln Riley's system. Jordan Addison's a junior this year. He's going to play this year and go the NFL. He's not leaving, right? And you know what else it does? It encourages more and more players to stay on a path to graduate in 3 years, which if you're doing things to encourage kids to graduate college, that's always a good thing. Always a good thing. And the thing about Jacob Lacy is Jacob Lacy could transfer after this year, not sit out anyway. So as I think about it, like the one-time transfer rule doesn't apply to this situation. I talked a lot about it, but it just kind of hit me. It doesn't apply to him because he's going to graduate in May. So he would have been able to transfer anywhere anyway.
Yep.
So it doesn't really make a lot of sense in this conversation because he can leave anyway. Sure. I keep forgetting he's a senior.
Yeah.
Because he hasn't played a ton the last 2 years. But he's a senior, so he could have left anyway. So it wouldn't have mattered. So the NCAA rule that I hate wouldn't have mattered, because as much as I dislike the way that this happened, I will never, ever advocate for changing the grad transfer rule. I think you should be rewarded for getting a degree from college if you play football. Absolutely. And one of those rewards should be, once you graduate, you can transfer and play wherever you want without any punishment. I'm all for that. I
agree with that. I agree.
So I do need to put a little bit of a caveat with my earlier thing, because his situation is different. And somebody just mentioned that in the thing as well, I see. So I think that is there you go. Somebody also asked about this. Brian, does it not put you at a competitive disadvantage if some kid can transfer and take Indy's playbook to one of Indy's opponents? I do not think they should be allowed to transfer to any scheduled teams. No, I mean, you get your playbook back. I mean, you give your playbook back. And the reality is I don't care if somebody has my playbook. Because they can know what we're running just by watching our film.
I was about to say, when I do film study, I know if you're running power, right. I know if you're running inside zone. Like
there's some terminology stuff that you can do, but that a lot of that stuff changes anyway. So there's a lot that kind of goes into that. So it is, but that's not a reason. It's not a reason to allow school, because schools, you and I both know, coaches will abuse that big time.
Oh yeah.
Well, this kid's got 3 years of eligibility, and these are the teams we play. Plus, we may play this team in the postseason, and that puts us at a competitive disadvantage. So he can't transfer to anybody worth a darn because we might play him the next 3 years. No, I'm not.
He can go to Western Illinois. Or something. He go out there. Yeah.
What you do is you make sure you get the playbook back, and then you create rules. I think one thing you can do with the NCAA is create rules where if a player gives any sort of, because like Ryan, you signed a contract to work at Irish Breakdown, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things in the contract was certain things you will learn about the way we do our business. If you left, you couldn't tell whoever you go work for those things.
Mhm.
They're proprietary to Irish Breakdown. You can have in your NIL or your NLI, your national letter of intent, that if you transfer, you can't give your playbook or any other information to another school. However, if you transfer to a school that Notre Dame plays, you have every right to say, hey, look, this is what we did. From a knowledge standpoint, I think that's okay. I mean, coaches do that.
Yep.
You know, it just isn't overly helpful because any team worth their darn is not going to use the same hand signals and the same calls and the same stuff in that game. And if they do, then you know what? You deserve to lose. If you're that stupid that you're going to play a team that you know a coach or a player on the other team has your stuff and you still do your same stuff, you're an idiot and you deserve to lose. I'm sorry. I know that may be harsh, Ryan, but that's just common sense, dude. You know, you're playing a team and a guy that played for you is on the other sideline. You know he knows your calls, and you're still going to use the hand signals? Come on now, dude. Yeah. That's just dumb. That's just dumb. John Papiti with a super chat. Thank you, Joe. Joe Papiti. Man, I just jacked your name all up, Joe. I am sorry. Joe Papiti with a super chat says the transfer portal is the absolute worst thing ever. It lets kids hold programs hostage. Play me or I'm leaving. Totally unfair. I agree. And in this instance, I think that, you know, if what I've been told is true, then I think Notre Dame kind of played it correctly.
Yeah.
You know, and here's another thing too. You know, people sign non-competes, right? Like in business, like there are things like I have worked at a place. Now I was able to manage that to get out of it, but like I've worked at places where I've had to sign a non-compete where if I leave, I can't cover Notre Dame for a year. I mean, so there was consequences to me leaving in certain circumstances. Now, I was able to negotiate my way out of those things, but that required me to engage in that negotiation, right? So people say, well, you can just quit a job and go somewhere else. Not every job is that way. When you sign a contract, there are a lot of jobs, Ryan, as you know, where you can't just up and leave.
Yeah.
You know, and so I do think that you can't just say, well, yeah, well, anyone can do this in a job. No, you can't. No, you can't. If there are certain people that if I wanted to hire them to come work at Irish Breakdown, I'd have to wait a year before they could do it because it's in they have non-competes in their contracts. So it's not quite the same in all jobs. Now, if you're working at McDonald's, you go work at Burger King, I doubt that there's a non-compete there, right? Unless you're maybe in upper management, then there's going to be language in your contract that you can and can't do certain things. So it's not a blank, and that no disrespect to working at McDonald's or Burger King. It's just certain jobs. Just like, okay, it doesn't matter if you working the line here, working the line there. Just you're working the line. But there's certainly things like in upper management, things like that, where you have certain proprietary knowledge where there are things you can and can't do if you decide to leave. And so I do think there's some aspects. And again, no one is saying you can't transfer, Ryan. I've never heard anyone make an argument you can't transfer. Nope. It's just I don't think you should be able to play right away. That's my thing. I just don't think you should be able to play right away unless there's extenuating circumstances. And in this instance, I don't think there are. I don't think you're not happy with your playing time unless, and this is why the one thing I propose, Ryan, and I think you liked this rule when we talked about it. If you want a promise, if you want a guarantee, then it should be in your contract.
In your contract, yeah.
Like writing. So when players sign their NIL, if I was promised the number 7, if I was promised I'm going to play as a freshman, if I was promised I'm going to get this dorm or this roommate or this thing or that thing, if a school's promising you something, it better be in your NIL. And if they break that promise, hey, I promise you that you're going to play at least 15 games you're going to play at least 15 snaps every game of your career unless you're injured. And they don't honor that contract, then you get a leave and sit out, right? If it's in my contract that I'm here, but if the position coach leaves, I get a one-time. I can. If the school's willing to put that in your contract as part of your recruitment, then you should. They honor that, and then there's a breach of contract. I think that should be a part of NIL. I mean, you've already got lawyers involved anyway, right? With NIL and different stuff. Have those things. If a school's not willing to put a promise they're making to you in writing, then it's not a real promise, and you should not allow it to factor your decision to go there.
That's true.
And if a school breaks it, then there you go.
When you wrote my contract, you had to tell me I'm awesome 10 times a day.
I did.
So that was in there.
I did. And I've gone overboard. I'd say at least 13, 14 times just to make sure.
At least.
To make sure.
At least.
You're such an idiot. I love it. I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it. It's great. We have a super chat from Jonathan Gabrick. I think we can agree to disagree on the transfer thing, but I love that you at least back up what you say with evidence. Not a lot of people do. Thanks, IB. And you know what, Jonathan? You don't have to agree with me. And you engage me respectfully, and I think I did the same to you. I mean, I have a strong feeling on this and a strong view on this as someone who was a player and a coach and as someone who transferred as a player, right? And so I just – because at the end of the day, Jonathan, where I'm coming from is I really believe at the end of the day, college football should be about building young men. Mm-hmm. And that's what it should be about. It should be about building young men into being really top-notch members of our society. That is what I believe a coach's number one responsibility should be. Now, part of that should include, if a kid's an NFL player, doing your best to get him ready to play in the NFL. But if I don't develop you as a player, but 20 years from now, you can tell me that I had an impact on you as a husband and as a father, as a boss, as an employee, an employer, whatever, that matters a lot more to me than the fact that, we won championships together. And that's what college football should be about at its core. Now, that doesn't mean you can't value competition, Ryan. It doesn't mean you can't value championships and yards and stats. It doesn't mean all that. Yep. But at the end of the day, if we're doing things that are taking away from our mission of developing young men into being responsible people who have to understand there are consequences to the decisions you make in life. And in our society today, and I'm going to go a little bit on a tangent here, I'm going to make it real brief. There's way too much in our society at every level of trying to remove accountability from our own decisions. And that should not be the case. A society without accountability is not a healthy society. Now, some accountability is nuts. You got arrested for shoplifting a candy bar, 20 years in a maximum security prison. No, that's silly, right? I mean, but there have to be consequences to our decisions. It doesn't mean that your decision is necessarily wrong or that I would tell you made a bad decision. But you have to embrace that if you make that decision, you have to accept the fact that there are consequences that come with it, right? And that's what we need to have. And we're removing that, and we're taking young people that are older or of the age of past generations that have had to fight world wars, and we're saying they shouldn't be held accountable for their actions. And that's insanity to me. And we've lost our mission of developing young people in college football. We've turned it into a business. I'm not blaming the kids for this at all. I'm blaming the grown-ups for this. Yeah. We've taken away any accountability. Oh, well, it's not his fault. It's this, it's that. Yeah, bull crap. You made a choice. You knew that choice was wrong. Stop blaming other people for why you made the decision you made. And embrace the consequences. And some of them are not major consequences. You have to sit out a freaking year. Oh, so what? That's worked for a lot of people. Worked for Lohi Gilman, right? Worked out pretty well for him, And so that's where it needs to be, in my opinion. And that doesn't mean every circumstance is that way. There are some kids who completely are justified in their desire to leave a program and should be able to play right away because they were treated unfairly. That is a real thing. This doesn't mean every kid who tries to leave is being a baby. Or some kids are in a situation like, dude, that's an unhealthy situation. You got to get out of there. And we're going to help you get out of there by helping you go play right away. And it's a legitimate situation. Or you legitimately have a mom battling cancer and you need to be there because you're the oldest child or whatever the case may be. Then we're going to help you. We're going to help facilitate that because you're trying to take accountability as a man to be where your family is. That doesn't mean you can't still play football, but you need to be where your family is. We're going to help facilitate that, and you're going to get play right away. There are circumstances where it's okay, but that's my tangent for today, Ryan. Is I just kind of, and I'm not saying Jonathan is saying that at all, Jonathan. It just your comment kind of led me to helping you understand why I'm so passionate about this. I'm not saying you don't care about that. I'm just explaining your comment and your nice back and forth in the chat, which I appreciate. Is there's a reason why I'm so passionate about it as someone who's been on both sides, as a player who had coaches that I couldn't trust, and as a coach who tried to learn from my experience as a player and make sure to the best of my ability that none of my players ever had to deal with what I had to go through as a player. And that's important to me. And I said this to my players, Ryan. I always said this. I care more about the kind of man you become than the kind of player you are.
Yeah.
And I wish more coaches were like, and I'll be honest with you, that's one of the reasons I have a great deal of respect for Marcus Freeman, because I do believe he genuinely believes in that. I do. And there's going to be times I'm going to disagree with football decisions he makes. There already have been. But one of the reasons I'm always going to be glad that he's at Notre Dame right now is because I do believe he understands that deep down, that's ultimately the mission that you have. Mm-hmm. Now, you can do that mission while also striving for – Lou Holtz did that. Asking his former players. He put a lot of emphasis on developing them as men. Yep. Now, it was within the framework of winning football games, but there was always a foundation of, I'm trying to make you a better man. You may not understand it right now. I've heard from so many Holtz players, I hated him when I was at Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. But I am so glad that I went through that, because now that I'm an adult and I'm out of that and I'm not in my feelings about playing time, I realized the lessons he was teaching me and how that's made me a better husband, a better father, all these other things, right? And I think we've just lost that a little bit too much in our society right now, Ryan. So anyway, that's my rant. Brian J. Irish, I still can't believe LSU Nation defended that fade accent, like put down the BK Kool-Aid, shaking my head. Yeah, I mean, honestly, all fan bases are like that. I mean, there are people I know that hate Brian Kelly now that used to hate me because of how much I hammered him in the past few years. There's sites that will now crush him and talk trash about him that would talk trash about me because how negative I was about him. Right? I mean, so that's true of all fan bases. I mean, if we're being honest, it really is. It really is. And there are some LSU fans that don't like it. Let's be honest about that too.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's something where I think that you kind of need to remove yourself from your fandom for a second, right? Because I mean, there's like it's never one side or the other. Like, it doesn't have to be, right? It's like you can support Brian Kelly and still say like he was ridiculous from the big accent. Like, it's
stupid, right?
Like, if I was an LSU fan, I could say like, yep, I still think Brian Kelly is going to do well at LSU, but also that fake accent was really, really stupid. Like,
and grinding on a player in a video was probably not a cool look. But you know what? He's going to win us football games, and I can live with that. Yeah, I get so tired of that. We see this in sports. We see it in politics. We see it in all like, hey, if you vote for a guy, you have to agree with everything he says or does. No, I don't. Why? Like, okay, I voted for the guy because he's good here, but I think he's an idiot there, right? I mean, hey, I'm a supporter of this coach, but this thing he did was dumb. Like, I should be allowed, as someone who fully supports Marcus Freeman, I should be allowed to say, hey, this thing he did in this game was a bad call, it's a bad decision. And it doesn't mean, oh, you're a hater now. No, it means he should have called timeout when and challenged that play against Cal. He should have. It's a bad decision. You know who else said that? Marcus Freeman. Yeah. Right? We should be able to do that. And I don't think there's too much of that in sports, Ryan, where you've got to agree with everything or you're just hater. This is where social media has been a good thing. I'm just going on all types of tangents today, man. Social media has been a good thing in a lot of ways. That's one area where it has not been. It's if you disagree with something, you're a hater. Like, no, you're a child. Right.
I think a lot of people on social media too, like they'll see like how I post and stuff and just have assumptions about me that I'm like an a-hole and stuff. And I'm just like, I can be passionate about something, but well, yeah, sure. But I can be a nice guy and still have some a-hole tendencies at times though, like there could be a steady balance there. Steady balance.
Sure. Yep. All right, here we go. We got some more things here from Archer. Archer 452. Him and Ladarius were having this really frustrating conversation about Ohio versus Alabama and all this. And he says, Brian, why does Ohio have a far richer history of high school football talent, D1 prospects than Alabama, and why would anyone be crazy enough to believe otherwise? So here's the thing. I think you are correct in that Ohio has a much richer history of developing high school football. Where Ladarius is correct is out, and Ryan, you and I have talked about this. Alabama is starting to produce a lot more big-time players than they have in the past. I mean, there's one school in Alabama. They got 2 stud D linemen. They got what's his name, Quay Russo and James Smith. I think they're both on the same defensive line.
Yeah. Yep.
And they're studs. And then you're seeing like, I mean, there's like 7 top 100 caliber defensive linemen coming out of like top 200 caliber defensive linemen coming out of Alabama this year. The state is producing more and more quarterbacks, every year. Yep. So yeah, there's a lot more talent coming out of it. So right now, Ohio State hasn't produced as many big time players as it has in the past. Alabama is ascending. So present, yes, it's correct. Alabama is producing a lot more big time talent right now. it's also true that over the last 30 years, Ohio by far.
Comfortably, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, Ohio's up there with anybody in like the 30-year
right.
span. Like it's
Right.
yeah.
Right. There's no question. No question. So that's kind of the way I would look at that. So I think you're both right in certain instances. And I don't often do that, but it's true.
But Archer's more right. Just kidding.
Hater. Brian J. Irish. Brian and Ryan, can losing a game after having a bye week change your perception on a coach team, not counting serious injuries? Yeah. Let me say this, Brian. In just big picture, it depends on who you lose to and how you lose. Right? Like 2011 changed a lot of my perception of Brian Kelly when they had finally started to gain some momentum. I don't know if you remember this, Ryan, but Notre Dame, obviously early in the season in 2011, it was a bad start to the year, right? You lost to South Florida in the opener, horrible loss. Then you go out the next week and you blow a 24-7 lead to Michigan and lose. But after that, they went on a 4-game winning streak they whipped Michigan State, who was pretty decent that year. They whipped Purdue, they whipped Air Force, and then they had a bye week and they're coming out to play USC. And, USC was a good team that year, right? And they were top 10 team. I mean, they were a good team, but they were coming off. Remember, they had fired their coach like a couple weeks before. And USC was ranked high, but remember, that was when they got embarrassed by Arizona State. Mm-hmm. I believe that's the year that they fired Lane Kiffin, correct? And Ed Orgeron took over as the interim. I believe that was 2011. Was that 2013? Let me go look at that. No, it was 2013 that happened. But they got blown out by Arizona State a few weeks before. And, they were ranked, but they were not playing great football at the time in 2011. They barely beat Arizona. And then Notre Dame goes out there and just gets outplayed by them, and made so many silly mistakes. You're like, how was this team not more prepared for this game? Like, you remember that play where Matt Barkley's rolling out and he pump fakes and Carlo Calabrese jumps. You're like, why are you jumping? Like, it's flipping Matt Barkley. He's not running. You know what I mean? Like, just run through him. Just so much stuff like that.
Man, I really liked Matt Barkley before he started having those shoulder injuries, man.
But he was not going to run, right? I
mean, he was not an athlete.
Like, dude ain't running. What are you doing?
He was the Southern Cal version of Jimmy Clausen. He was not running anywhere.
Yes. The point being, they were unprepared for that football game, right? Now, sometimes you can come out of a bye and you do everything right, and the other team just outplays you, right? Just that happens. But in this particular instance, Brian, if Notre Dame loses to BYU, that would be very problematic for me.
Yep.
Just because you are the more talented team, there's just not a lot of excuses for me where I'm going to justify losing to BYU. Yep. And it wouldn't change my perception of the coach. It would definitely change my perception of this team, but it would give me a little bit more pause about things than I did after the Marshall game. Because here's the thing. If they beat BYU, I said this on a radio show in Utah last night. I think it was. I think I said it last night. It could be something else. But the thing I said was, if you beat BYU and go on a run, your season is basically, you had a bad day against Marshall. Just had a bad day. But you still feel good about where things are trending. Right? I mean, would you agree with that, Ryan? You blew out North Carolina, you beat BYU, you handled Stanford, you handled Syracuse, you handled UNLV. Look, you had a bad day against Marshall in the year. You've turned things around, you're good to go. Notre Dame's rolling. That's the perception. You lose to BYU, and now all of a sudden, North Carolina becomes the anomaly.
Yes. Yep.
It completely changes the perception of this football team and the football coach. So that's also what makes this a huge game. But yes, Brian, especially coming out of a bye, that would be problematic to me, because all the injuries that they're really dealing with that are major are ones that have already happened, and you had the bye week to prepare for them, right? So,
It's
quarterback, stuff like that. So yeah, it would be a concern, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
Keith Wiegand, give Rocco a shot at defensive tackle. Doesn't look as though he is working out on the offensive line yet. Keith, Ryan, you and I have seen some things. I don't think Rocco is a fit for the defense, for this defensive style. If Notre Dame was still running Bob Diaco's defense, I would actually entertain this, Ryan. I would. Yeah. Rocco was a decent defensive lineman in high school. He's a very slow-footed kid, though. right now.
Diaco is a
And
3-4 guy, right?
He's a pure 2-gap 3-4 team.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would be okay with giving Rocco this look.
Throw him at the nose and
yes,
let him work.
Because he doesn't have to be quick and a penetrator. This is more of a penetrating type of defense. They even Chris Smith, who's a space eater, he has come off, be physical and get a push. There is a level of athleticism required to do that I just don't think Rocco has right now, in my opinion. Yep. And so that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Rocco's got to. I mean, right now, Keith, Rocco's got to focus on offensive line and getting better with what he's working on doing right now. That's point blank to it.
Correct. There's no question about that. Got a couple more here down questions. Mike Sullivan says, I would rather the coaches tell him no and not lie to him. They could have agreed to what he wanted and then not held up once he played another game.
I agree.
If that is the circumstance, 100% agree.
Yes.
100% agree. I wouldn't. I mean, you set that precedent. There's no unringing that bell. You lose your team.
It only makes short term and long term. It can have really bad effects if you lie, because then the next time a player is unhappy with playing time or whatever, if you try to make the same promise, they're going to be like, "But you didn't promise that to Jacob." Right. Like you, so or you did promise that to Jacob.
It's a twofold thing. One is the fact that you lied to that kid.
Yes.
And you will lose the trust of your team.
Yep.
That's one precedent. The other precedent is allowing a player to manipulate you to the point where you do agree to that in the first place. Both of those are bad. And then you put them together, Ryan, and it's a double dagger. And it's just not one. And again, I'm not saying that that's definitely how this happened, but if it is how it happened, and I've kind of been told by a couple different people that's kind of not to the degree of what happened, but this is kind of where things are. I don't think, I don't think it was a situation where Jacob was necessarily like holding them hostage per se.
Yep.
But that was just the circumstances. I think it's always right to be honest. Look, there's a way. So like my wife and I were early in our marriage, as you all know, I'm a little bit of a hot-tempered guy and very expressive. And that would shake my wife a little bit when we would have disagreements. Is I would be talking at a volume and with a tone and with a facial expression that was far greater than what my feeling was. It would come across as far more harsh than what I was thinking and feeling, right? Because I'm a coach, like you're expressive. And one of the things that we were kind of doing this Christian like marriage, like, early marriage, like, helping you get comfortable and communicate better early in your marriage. And one of the things that was said was you can be right, but wrong at the top of your voice. And the point is like, you can be correct in what you're saying, but how you go about saying it can be wrong. Point being, there's a way that you can be honest that makes you a jerk because of how you delivered the honesty. Correct? But it's never wrong, in my opinion, to be honest. Right? And I'd rather you just say, I'm not going to talk about that than to lie, in my opinion. So as long as it's delivered in a way with some tact and care for how it's being presented, I'm never going to say a coach should lie to a kid. Mm-hmm. Right? And the only way that I would ever suggest it is like in an extreme circumstance where you just find out something that's going on in this kid's personal life and he asks you something going on and it's like, dude, it's not my place to tell you. Like, hey, man, I don't know what's going on. You need to call home. You kind of lied to the kid, but there was a reason for it because he needs to hear from his dad that something just bad happened to a relative, right? Like, you get what I'm saying? But there's always exception to everything. But to the point, Ryan, is anytime you're being honest with a kid, as long as it's delivered properly, I'm not going to criticize you for that. I'm not.
I've learned with my wife to practice my inflection, Brian. So I sometimes it's like, sure, babe, but then it actually needs to be, sure, babe, I got you. Yeah, sure. Yeah. You come here from Football Talk and leave with life lessons right here, folks.
There you come. I'm helping y'all understand why you transferred. I'm helping y'all with marriage advice. It's just a great thing we do here, man. This is great
inflection, folks. If you get nothing out of this podcast today, it's that you use good inflection with your loved ones.
Yep. Here we go. Let's get to some more here. This is some good questions here today, everybody. Jason Rose says, hey, Brian, when building a coaching staff, what would you prioritize more, recruiting or track record of developing players in this era of college? It depends on the position, Jason.
Yeah.
Honestly, if it's offensive line, it's development. Defensive line, development. Linebacker, development. Quarterback, development. Running back, recruiting. Wide receiver, recruiting. Corner, recruiting. Now, in neither of those instances can someone be awful at the other thing.
Right.
For example, if I have an offensive line coach who is a great developer and just a kind of an okay recruiter, well, that's what I'm paying Chad Bowden for, right? And his staff for. Let me go get, and this is what made Lou Holtz so good. Lou Holtz was not a great recruiter. He was a great closer. Vinny Serrato was the great recruiter. Do you think Joe Moore did any recruiting when he was with Vinny? No, Vinny did it, right? And then just let Joe Moore coach him up, right? And so I want to keep saying right today. I got to stop doing that. It really frustrates me when I'm editing the podcast and I hear myself say that. It drives me nuts. But anyway, give me a guy that can develop and I can recruit, like especially with Marcus Freeman. Like if you have a linebackers coach who's a great developer, and Marcus Freeman's your head coach, guess what? You're going to give him talented linebackers to work with because he can sell the development as a recruiting pitch, right? Like Harry Heastand doesn't have to be a great recruiter. He can just say, okay, what's your recruiting pitch, coach? All right, cool. Here it is. I can say it really quickly. Zach Martin, Ronnie Stanley, Quentin Nelson, Mike McGlinchey, Nick Martin, Chris Watt, Robert Haynes. That's my recruiting pitch, right? Yep. I mean, if you're Ryan Day, okay, coach, what's your recruiting pitch? As a quarterback, okay, Justin Fields, CJ Stroud. I mean, that's the recruiting pitch. Yep. But that only comes true if you're a great developer, right? So a great developer can have success recruiting because of the development. A great recruiter eventually is going to run out of kids that he can convince to come play for him because they're going to look at him like, yeah, dude, you keep recruiting big time classes, but none of these guys ever pan out.
Yep.
So that's why I would go with it that way.
Is that a Jimbo Fisher knock? Just kidding.
It is, but it wasn't directed to be. But that's a great example, Ryan. A great example of that. There's no question. All right. So somebody said, Siggy, so we were joking that we're improving marriages. In this instance, it might not go well. Siggy said, literally can't wait to use that top of your voice line on my wife later when I inevitably get mogged. Probably not a good idea to use it in that spirit. So there you go. Thanks, 10-Day. I appreciate you on that, man. I really do. I appreciate you. Appreciate you very much. Joe Papiti, I got it right this time. If this has been addressed, I'm sorry, but on to the coming game. Am I wrong in thinking that play action this week could be huge and really open up the middle for passing? 1,000% right, Joe. I mean, but that's why at the beginning of the offensive conversation, we talked about how important it is to establish a run game because when play action is not as effective when you stink at running the ball. Now, one of the misconceptions about play action is you have to establish the run in that game. If you are a good running team throughout a season, then an early play action can be effective even if you haven't established a run because teams are keying on it based off their week of preparation, right? So, but you have to be good at running the football. And I don't know if just the North Carolina game was enough to make BYU be like 9 down, when they see run on the first play of the game. I think you kind of got to establish it a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, these 7 in the box and then the 2 safeties. It's like, ooh, run look. Everybody come except the corners, right? They're not there yet, right? We saw that in 2017. I don't think this team is there yet, right? But I think that is something why establishing the run game is so important. Because, yes, you can open up some of the middle. And I don't know if play action is as great for the middle as much as it's like the intermediate middle and deep middle for sure. But I also think it opens up some opportunities on the outside. I really like play actions that hit sort of outside the seams, Ryan. Like a deep drag,
deep over,
a post corner that really sells the heck out of the post, or even like the angle post. If you're a team that like does a lot of blocking of the safeties with your outside receivers, the corner of that angle post, you know what I'm talking about, or the angle corner. Where it's not like a vertical post corner, but you like run down towards the safety, like you're going to block them, then you corner, right? I like things like that more so than just like a pure post. I like the idea of posts. And I one of my favorite plays when I was coaching was the high-low play actions, right? Post, deep drag, or one of the teams we were on, we ran like a post dig. I like the deep overs more so than the post dig, Ryan, because you could create a more true high-low on that level. Right. But it kind of depends on what you're trying to accomplish and what the defense is doing. If it's a cover 2 look, then you want to try to get them both over to the one safety side. If it's a single high look, then you can do more of a post dig and a post over type of thing. So it just depends on that. But I like that, but I prefer, I think you agree with this based on your reaction, some of the stuff that's more working outside of that, over top and outside of that kind of stuff, into those opens. Because I think that's where the play action openings really come from, is sort of that window outside 100%. The safety alignment.
100%.
All right, next one. So that was a good one, Joe. I appreciate that. Colin Miller. This is an interesting question, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer this in the way you like it, because I don't really think like that. Colin says, I know this is looking into the future, but if Notre Dame beats by BYU and then loses to Clemson and USC for an 8-4 season, how would you rank this season and grade Marcus Freeman?
It's a disappointment. I don't know what I would put a letter grade on it, Colin. Look, 8-4 in a vacuum is a disappointing season, right? Like, that is not up to standard at Notre Dame. I need to see what it looks like, though. So there's a little context that needs to be seen with that, right? Like, what did it look like in those particular football games? Was it competitive? What were there injuries? Like, there's a lot of things that go into it. But my overarching comment is, if Notre Dame goes 8-4 this season, it's a disappointment.
Yeah. So, I mean, if they go 8-4 and 3 of the 4 playoff teams are USC, Clemson, and Ohio State, makes you feel a little bit better. But is really anything changed at that point in time? You still can't beat the best teams in the country, right? So it would be a disappointment. But again, to your point, like, let's say you have like 8 devastating injuries and you lose to Clemson and USC by field goals in both games when you're playing half your team as backups. Yeah. It changed the circumstance, right? Like, I look at Clemson losing to Notre Dame in 2020 in the regular season a lot different because you didn't have Trevor Lawrence and all those guys. If you'd had Trevor, and I look at the win for Notre Dame differently because of that. So there's always the caveats to that, but I'd have a hard time really embracing that, and that's why the Marshall loss was so bad.
Yep.
Because it you don't have that excuse for that game, but I just would need to see how it would play out. But I have a hard time finding a
silver lining,
a scenario that would make me be okay with it.
Right.
I just don't think you can do that, Ryan. I don't think that's a healthy way to evaluate a team. And let's be honest, if Brian Kelly was the head coach and that happened, I wouldn't be excusing that.
100%.
I wouldn't. I mean, I would want to see context, but I wouldn't excuse that. And the one thing we promised, I was very open with the fact that I don't like Brian Kelly. But me not liking him is not why I criticized him. There are coaches that I've praised in the past and present that I don't like here and at other places. My job is not to let my feelings determine how I speak of you. It's to evaluate what you do. Right, Ryan?
Yep.
And so one thing we promised was, and I've said before, I really like Marcus Freeman personally. I like him a lot. I think he's a good man. And that's fine. However, the thing for me is, but the standard is still the standard, no matter what I think about you. And that's the reality of it. And so if I would criticize Brian Kelly for something, then I need to be fair and criticize Marcus Freeman for it. And I have a hard time justifying that. And you can say, well, the difference is Brian Kelly had been a coach for a long time and Marcus Freeman. Yes, but you can't sacrifice a season to hire a young head coach because of the roster. You had a roster that should have contended for a playoff spot. Simple as that. Now, I can live with the loss to Marshall if you go on a run and run the table, because you're showing me, hey, you guys didn't have a good day that day. You rebounded from it and you've moved on from it. And boy, this team's playing really well. I can live with it. Disappointed, but I'm going to live with it and be excited about the future.
Yep.
8-4 would concern me a lot, to be honest with you.
Without a doubt.
A lot. So you got another one here. Domer Buzz. Northern schools in Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, etc. cannot practice football from end of season to following fall. Here in Florida, teams have 4 one-week practices and play 2 exhibition games during the summer. Teams can certainly, in Indiana and Ohio, play late spring and summer ball. Now, they can't play in the winter, but with all due respect, I mean, there's a lot of things teams can do during the winter to help them be good, and including playing basketball. So I think the lack of spring ball in some ways hurts development of players in some ways, but I don't think that it's the end all be all that some people in the South think. I think it has a lot more to do with just the volume of talent and talent that used to be up in the North. I mean, Rocket Ismail developed just fine not having spring ball in summer football when he was in Pennsylvania. Same with Ricky Waters and Todd Light and Jerome Bettis, who are Northern guys. Those guys are coming out of the South now more so because of population shifts over the last 30 years, more so than spring ball, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not always one answer, but I think that has a lot more to do with it. When there are more people, then you're gonna produce more athletes. I mean, that's the reason that the bigger states produce more players. I mean, that's just you know what I mean. That's the reality of it, Ryan. Is that's just kind of how it's always going to be. Yep. So I think those things have a bigger impact, because I'm gonna go do something here real quick, and just kind of to prove a point. And I've done this before. So let me just find this here real quick. So, for example, in 1984, right? You look at the presidential election of 1984, and you look at some of the stuff in the South, and you look at, because for those who don't know, I would hope that everybody knows this. I mean, if this isn't unnecessary learning for everyone that goes to school in the United States of America, I don't know what is. But if you look at the South, right, and you look at 1984, Ronald Reagan beats Walter Mondale. The state of Florida had 21 electoral votes. Texas had 29 electoral votes. Louisiana had there was 10, 7, 9. Georgia had 12. South Carolina had 8. So you look at some smaller numbers. And then in Ohio that year, you had 23 electoral votes. Illinois had 24. You had 12 in Indiana. You had 25 in Pennsylvania. You had 20 in Michigan. And then you fast forward to 2020, this most recent presidential election. So Florida jumped from 21 to 29. 8 electoral vote change is a lot of people. Texas went from 29 to 38. Again, a 9-point shift in electoral votes is a large population shift, right? Mm-hmm. This isn't just a couple thousand people, right? And then you look at other states. Georgia went from 12 to 16. North Carolina went from 13 to 15. That's a little bit of a smaller jump. Georgia went from 12 to 16, and then most of the southern states are around the same. Ohio went from 23 to 18. That's a big population drop. Pennsylvania went from 25 to 20. Illinois went from 24 to 20. Indiana went from 12 to 11. They're about the same. Michigan went from 20 to 16, and New York went from 36 to 29. That is a lot of people leaving the North and going to the South.
Good. Get away from me.
and so you look at that, Ryan, and you say that those demographics are a lot of the reasons why we see some of those changes. Look, people say, well, why is Arizona producing more football players? Arizona's gone from 7 to 11, and I believe, if I remember correctly, the next time that there's a change, I think Arizona is going to be one of the states that's going to gain another seat, because there's only a finite number of electoral votes, and because basically it's like there's only a certain number, and it gets split up based on the population demographics, right? California's about to lose some people. New York's going to keep losing some people, or losing some of those numbers. And so when you see that, it signifies large population shifts. And I think those large population shifts are why you see certain states that didn't produce big-time football players at the same volume 40, 50 years ago producing more now, and why you see states like Ohio and Michigan and Illinois not producing as many as we saw a long time ago, in Pennsylvania, because there's just a lot fewer people there. And so those are the things that, and it's a lot of it's job related. I mean, where are the jobs, right? Yeah. But those things I think have a lot more impact on things than just, well, they have spring ball in Florida. Okay, that's part of it. There's other states that have spring ball and they don't produce players like Florida does, right? So I think those are the different things that factor into it. Right. So that's my
lesson.
Yeah, that's my
history lesson.
We're giving marriage advice. We're doing history lessons and tying them into football. We're on a roll here, man. We're on a roll.
You just said Walter Mondale on the podcast.
Yeah, well, I'm just stating facts. Just stating facts. I mean, Reagan won that. It was like 49-1. And the only state he lost was Mondale State, and he didn't lose by much. So we haven't seen an election like that in a long time. Don't think that we will in a very long time either. So anyway, so that's your history lesson for the day. So. And if you didn't know the Electoral College is based on that, then you need to open up a.
They teach that in school still. They teach that in school.
Good.
Yeah.
If you
don't population, they know it.
You need to learn some stuff, folks. All right, someone will tell you.
I'll call one of the. I guess they'd be 7th or 8th graders from last year to ask them if we taught that.
Yeah. Hey, did we teach this? You don't remember?
No. Oh no, we did. Oh, we did. It's a guarantee.
Yeah. Archer says, Brian, Ohio does not allow spring ball. There are things they allow in Ohio. Yes, there is. You have 7-on-7 leagues. You are allowed to take your team to team camps and practice at camps. There's a lot of things you can do in Ohio that's not like the spring ball that you have in Florida, but there's a lot of things you do. And there's 7-on-7 tournaments with those kids up north all the time now. And that's a big thing now is and I think that's partly why we're seeing some of these like the Boom team in Chicago and Illinois is one of the best 7-on-7 teams around there. And all of a sudden, what starts to happen? Start to see more and more athletes coming out of Illinois. Why? Because those kids are now having an opportunity to play football year round. I do think there are some benefits to that. I'm not going to sit there and dismiss them. I just think it's not in my top 2 or 3 as reasons why that's the case is where I'm coming from. All right, here we go. Another one from Ryan B. I'm all right with Marcus Freeman having a year to get his program figured out the way he wants it. A down year isn't the end of the world. Needs to be able to make tough decisions if offense continues to struggle. Ryan, I won't give you a chance to respond to this first. I want to see what you have to say about this, and then I'll answer it.
I mean, I get where Ryan's coming from. Great name, by the way. I get it for a second, right? Like, you do have to set the table, and you do have to change things about the program that maybe you necessarily didn't agree with. You have to break habits, all that good stuff. I get it, but there also is a standard here. And I don't think that the cupboard was left bare is my biggest thing, right? Like, I think that Notre Dame has better talent than an 8-4 team, a 7-5 team. So it is a cautionary flag, I guess. I wouldn't say red flag, because I agree with a certain extent that, like, hey, I'm not going to ultimately judge Marcus Freeman based upon what he did just in 2022. It's going to be the entirety of his career. But there is a little bit that gives you like pause, right? And there is a standard at Notre Dame. So I think there is some context to it, Ryan, that I can agree with, but ultimately 8-4 or worse is just not acceptable at Notre Dame. It's just not. So
now, if what Ryan said is true, what Ryan B said is true, in that you take the 8-4 because it gets him where he wants the program to be, and next year you go on a run. Sure. I will be okay with that, but it doesn't take away from this being a bad year, because I think you need to do both, right? It's what we've seen so far from the defensive coordinator at Ohio State, Jim Knowles. He has adapted how he normally does things because he knows we got a team to compete this year.
Yep.
And in a lot of ways, I think Notre Dame should be more competitive this year. I mean, Ryan, look around the country. Who's the great team this year? And Georgia just almost lost to Missouri. They didn't play. Yep. They did not blow out Kent State, who stinks, right? I mean, Alabama's really good, but this isn't a vintage Alabama team. No. You know, Ohio State's been pretty good, but they're beating up on teams that stink. You know, they struggle with Notre Dame, who lost tomorrow. I mean, there are no great teams in college football. There's no 2019 LSU. There's no 2018 Clemson. It's a missed opportunity. I mean, it is. We can say that and still believe that we like the direction Marcus Freeman's going with the program, right? But it doesn't mean you lose the importance of what this mean could year. Is it the end of the world? No. Does it impact recruiting? Yeah, it does. It does. It already has. You know, does it mean you're locked into being an 8-4 team the rest of your career? No, of course not. You know, I mean, definitely not. But it does matter. I would rather him get the program where he wants and be 10-2. You know what I mean? So I just, you know, I think, you know, I think that's just kind of where I'm at on it, Ryan, is I just feel like 8-4 is not acceptable. It just isn't. It just isn't. I love the cell phones that some Ohio State fans make. Like, stop trying to downplay Ohio State because you guys suck. If we suck, then that means that was a really ugly win over a team that sucks that you trailed for 35 minutes of the game. Like,
wasn't a quality win then. You can't claim it as a quality win.
Better than that. Like, just don't be a clown.
Yeah.
And there's way too many Ohio State fans that are clowns. With all due respect, Archer, you're not. But let's be real, man. You see what's in the chat. You know what's going on there. All right, so Ryan, I think that is. Do we have any more? Oh, here we got one from Sports Cool 77. Do you guys think Watts played more in this game? Will plays more in this game, meaning the upcoming game, because he corrected that in his next chat.
Mm-hmm.
In this game, especially in the first half with JD out.
Is this assuming that they're going to like a nickel or dime look?
Yeah, I would think so. But I don't think that means Xavier Watts plays more. I think that means Tariq Bracy plays more.
Yeah.
I don't think Xavier Watts playing more will have anything to do with JD Bertrand.
Doesn't really affect the safety rotation much.
I don't think so. Unless the only exception would be is if Notre Dame decides to go with a nickel look that was a third safety. But I don't think they would do that, mainly because, you got DJ Brown and Ramon Henderson both coming off injuries. I don't think you want to take one of your safeties away and put him in the slot. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that yeah. So here's an interesting question, Ryan.
Uh-oh.
John Bay says, honest question, what is the standard at Notre Dame? For ages, we beat middling opposition and have come up short against the big dogs. We have to raise the standard. Hopefully Marcus Freeman can do it. And this is a great question. And this is why I was so hard on Brian Kelly. Because the standard at Notre Dame is not going 10-2 unless 10-2 is maximizing your talent as a football team. To me, the standard at Notre Dame is twofold. One is the ultimate standard is to compete for championships, right? And we're just talking about football wise right now. There's always a standard, no matter what your record is, there's always a standard of you are developing young people. I think Notre Dame still puts some value in that as an institution. Ty Willingham developed young people. They 100% graduation rate and all that, but he wasn't winning football games. You got to do both, right? So that part's a given, right? That's a given. You got to do things a certain way, the right way, sort of thing. Yep. The other standard is, Ryan, is your goal is to have your program among the best teams in the country, to where you can be competitive for championships on an annual basis. That does not mean you win championships on an annual basis, because Lou Rockne didn't win them every year. Frank Leahy didn't win them every year. Eric Parsegian didn't win them every year. Lou Holtz didn't win them every year. Dan Devine didn't win them every year. Nick Saban doesn't win them every year, more than most, but not. Urban Meyer doesn't win them every year. Dabo doesn't win them every year. But what Lou did, what made Lou so good for a period of time is really from like 88 to like 93. Every year, Notre Dame was a play here, a play there from playing for a championship. And in several of those years, they're a playoff team, even in years where they didn't necessarily win a championship. And what made Bobby Bowden only won, 2 titles?
Yep.
But what made that such a great run is every year they were top 5, every single year. And within that, there'd be a lot of big wins. Back then, what people got to remember is for a big chunk of Bobby Bowden's career, they were an independent. Mm-hmm. And they'd play Notre Dame in the 90s. They'd play Michigan. They'd go out west and play teams out west. And so, and Bobby had that thing, we'll play anybody anywhere. They didn't duck Miami. They didn't pull a Florida Gators and duck Miami when Miami got good. They took those L's, and then they used that to say, okay, that's the new standard. If we want to be the best team in Florida, we got to be better than that. And they got better. Right. And so it's about, are you competing for championships on a consistent basis? Are you maximizing the potential of your program? And are you doing it in a certain way at Notre Dame, which is involving, you're not going to cheat. You're not going to bring in kids and not value education. You're not going to go out and do some of the things that people think you have to do to win, which I don't think you have to do to win. And so it's about maximizing your potential, and maximize your potential Notre Dame, Ryan, is you got to win big games. The frustrating thing about Lou Holtz wasn't that he didn't win big games. He did win big games. He won way more big games than he lost. It was, how did you lose to Stanford? You know what I mean? Like, how did you beat Florida State and then lose to BC the next week? It was always those kind of losses that were the frustrating ones. He had a great record against Michigan. He did. He with all due respect to Bo Schembechler, that was a matchup that Lou dominated until Bo retired, right? He lost, I think, in 86. I think, but, won most of those. Had some ties, but some of the losses he had to Michigan and ties to Michigan were when Gary Moeller took over. Thereafter Bo retired. So when I look at it, Ryan, I think that's the standard for me. You're competing for championships on a consistent basis, and you're a team that people just don't want to play. And if they are going to play you, they're going to walk away from that game saying, "Man, that we won, but we're limping away." You may beat me in a fight, but I promise you're limping away from this one.
Yep.
You're going to get hurt, and that's how Notre Dame was. They beat Colorado one year, lost them the next year, but it was a battle. It was a battle. You're a block in the back penalty away from beating Colorado 2 years in a row. When Colorado was a legitimate top 3 team, you beat them in the Orange Bowl 1 year, Ryan, and they were ranked number 1. If they beat you, they're champs. The next year they beat you, and that gets them half of a championship, right? Mm-hmm. Miami wins 3 titles in 5 years. The 2 years they didn't win a title, years they lost to Notre Dame, right? That's how in 88-90 they won in 87, they won in 89, and they won in 91. They didn't lose it. They didn't win in 88. They didn't win in 90. 88, Notre Dame won because they beat Miami. And Miami knew the path to a championship goes through South Bend. And Notre Dame knew the path to a championship goes through Miami. And that was the reality of it, right? Being that team again. That's who we needed to be. Like Ohio State, they haven't won a championship since 2014. But you know what? In most years, they're competitive for a championship. That's where you need to be. Now, you say, okay, it's been a decade, win a championship. If you get to that point, sure. But, you're what Bama's done the last 10 years, Ryan, is not the standard to me. That's just
it's absurd.
It's a different thing,
yeah.
Right? But you should be competing for championships every year. You're winning more of the big games and you're losing. You're beating your rivals when they're good, not just when they suck, which has been the thing at Notre Dame. And when you go play on the big stage, that is when you're at your best. Mm-hmm. I think that last part's the biggest one for me. Yeah. Ryan Kelly won a lot of games, but Notre Dame in the biggest stages more often than not only did that win, they weren't competitive. They weren't.
And Brian, I feel like 8-4 keeps getting thrown out in the chat a little bit. Like that's what the number people keep lying on. If Notre Dame does go 8-4, that means that they are going to lose to Clemson and USC most likely. Right? And again, you're talking about the standard, right? And John B talked about it here, right? They've come up short against the big dogs, right? Did anything change this year? If it didn't, then you haven't hit your standard. That's the point of it.
That's absolutely right. Absolutely right. And that's what we're going to hold Marcus Freeman to. I mean, you're going to occasionally have the bad losses. Like, sure. Urban Meyer's, one of the worst losses of Urban Meyer's career was a 14-point home loss to a mediocre Virginia Tech team. Mm-hmm. You know what he did the rest of the year? Won every big game they had, which launched him into the playoff, which launched into his title at Ohio State. That's where you need to be, right? I mean, I've said this before. Most of Nick Saban's championship teams were not undefeated.
No.
2020 and his first and his most recent were the 2 undefeated teams. All the ones in between, they lost a game in the regular season.
And I would say this about Nick Saban too, although that's not who you're trying to. I mean, you're trying to emulate it, but we both don't agree that that's not like sustainable to emulate
from a championship standpoint.
Yes, 100%.
Right.
But even the same context, right? Nick Saban's first year, they lost to Louisiana Monroe. Remember, in his initial season, was that up to standard for Alabama football? Absolutely not. Has it been up to the standard since then? For sure it has.
Right.
That's
right.
That's how things change, man.
Right.
So
then the circumstances are different. And that's the point. That's why 8-4 isn't acceptable in this season, is because the circumstances which he took over the team are different.
Yeah. Mike Shula's teams were not the best Alabama teams.
They were good, but he had to overcome a lot of crap. You know what I mean? Like they had a 10-win season, 2 years before he took over?
Did they?
Right? Yeah.
What was it? The year before, it was 6-6, right? I think, or something like that.
Yeah, I think so. So. But 2 years before that, they were a 10-win team and won a bowl game. Let me go find his record at Alabama. Yeah, they went in 06, they went 6-6. And they technically in his last 2 years went 0-8 because they vacated both of the seasons.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. True. But they went 10-2 that previous year and beat Texas Tech in a bowl game. They lost late in the year to LSU and Auburn. At one point in time, they were up to number 4 in the rankings.
Oh, wow.
They beat Florida that year, 31-3, beat Tennessee that year.
Who's the quarterback on that team?
Oh, my goodness. I do not remember. Let me see.
I have no idea.
Brody Croyle.
Oh, Brody Croyle is still there. Nice.
Yep. but I mean, you watch them play, and it's like, okay, they're good, but they're not great, right? I mean, they played LSU, lost in overtime, lost at Auburn by 18, beat Texas Tech by 3, and then the next year they went out and they were 6-6 and had some pretty bad losses.
I remember when some Kansas City Chiefs fans thought that Brody Croyle was the future of Kansas City football.
Not good. Not good. Not good at all. Not good.
That kid had a cannon though, but yeah.
And to finish up this question though from Jean Bay, Marcus Freeman understands that, and I think that's one reason why I'm going to be more forgiving of him than Brian Kelly, because I'll guarantee you that if Notre Dame goes 8-4, Marcus Freeman will not spin that 8-4. He will not. He will say, this is BS, and he will make changes. I believe that with all my heart. From conversations I've had with him, with other people, I don't think he'll be happy with that. Will there be some understandable reasons why? Maybe. But the problem I have with Brian Kelly is Brian Kelly would justify that. Yeah. And he sought to lower the Notre Dame standard. I think Marcus Freeman has a full understanding of why it is harder at Notre Dame. And I remember sitting there having a conversation with him when I interviewed him one-on-one this summer. And just some of the things we discussed kind of before the interview started, you know that he has a healthy appreciation for it is harder here. And no one has ever denied that. It is harder at Notre Dame. But it's not so hard that you can't do it if you're willing to put in the work. And that was my first about Brian Kelly. He would kind of lower the standard, lower the bar. Hey, it's okay if we went 10-3 this year because we almost won against Clemson and Stanford. Almost won.
Yeah.
Well, your best win was over Navy. Sorry, not the standard. The standard isn't 10-2 every year if that means you lost to the only 2 good teams you played. That's not the Notre Dame standard, right? It's not. I'm sorry. Are there years when 10-2 can be a good year? Yeah, there are. But it's not the standard. The standard is you are a championship caliber team year after year. And if you do have a year like this where you stub your toe early, by November, you want to be that team that says, boy, I am glad they lost to Marshall. I would not want to play that team in the playoff. That's where you need to be. And there were years like that for Notre Dame where you're like, hey, you're lucky you won that game because if you'd have got that team later in the year, that doesn't happen. And that's kind of where you want to be, you know. Yeah. So, and you want to get to the point where you do get the benefit of the doubt, the Bama, because there's years Bama's won the title where they didn't deserve. 2017, Bama did not belong in the playoff. They lost their last game of the year by like 15. They did not to Auburn. They did not belong in the playoff that year. I'm sorry, they didn't. But they got the benefit of the doubt because of all the other titles they won, and they handled their business. You want to be there. Where, you know what? I know they lost to Stanford at home, but you know what? Like, we're going to put them in the playoff because look what they did in the other 3 big-time games where they beat Michigan and they beat USC and they beat Miami. You know, that's where you want to be as a program.
Yep.
So, Ryan, I think that is it for today's questions. And, some really interesting conversation here today, folks. But we do have to get running. Before we leave, everybody, please do us a favor. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that notification bell. Share this podcast. Sign up for the message board at boards at irishbreakdown.com. Check out the content we have at irishbreakdown.com. We'll have some more for you on the Jacob Lacy stuff later today on the message board as we kind of get more information about kind of what happened and kind of what happens next. And we'll try to put some more out there on that. But I want to thank everybody for being on the show today, being with us today. A lot of fun, Ryan. Really good stuff today. Thank you all so much for joining us on the Irish Breakdown podcast.